Hello there, everybody. Welcome back to Star Wars Lads for tonight's live Q&A and Ask Us Anything as well as Star Wars news update. Thank you all so much for joining us tonight on this wonderful Tuesday evening. We're going to talk about all the latest in Star Wars news. Not as big of a week as last week, but we do have some holdovers from last week we didn't get to talk about, as well as a few new pieces of information, including our main topics, which are going to be the new writer on the Daisy Ridley Ray's new Jedi Order movie, the third writer on that one. And we've got also, very excitingly for a lot of us who are High Republic fans, finally a cover for Trials of the Jedi, as well as a synopsis by Charles Soule. That should be the finale book of the main High Republic story we've had for the last 4 years now. So pretty excited that that's coming to a close. We also have some information about the Acolytes viewership numbers in comparison with what some of the other things that have been reported, as well as an excerpt that got a lot of people going crazy on the internet. We're going to talk about with Legacy of Vader, the new comic series from Charles Soule that shows apparently Watto getting killed by Darth Vader, at least inferred by Kylo Ren. We're going to talk about the validity of that, and is that actually something that people should all be worked up over. So we're going to discuss all those things. But as always, this is an Ask Us Anything. It's a live Q&A. So these streams are fueled by your guys' chats. So send in anything you want into the chat. You can ask us anything you want. As you guys might have seen earlier, I put up in the chat room kind of a new set of guidelines that Sanak and I had talked about. We decided that since we get so many chats from all of you, and we really appreciate all the chats, I mean, seriously, we don't want to limit your guys' chats, that in order to get to everybody, because there have been concerns brought up to us in the past from other viewers who haven't gotten their chats on the stream, and they're like sending them in at 7:45, and we're answering all the ones from like 3 p.m. That we are answering a lot of the same people over and over again. And while we appreciate all that, we do want to make sure everybody gets a chance on the stream. So we're going to answer 2 from everybody off the bat. But that being said, like I said in the comment here, we're going to answer as many of your guys' questions as possible. So you don't have to limit it to 2. I know a lot of people in the chat are limiting it to only 2. You can send in as many as you want. We're just going to answer a couple from each person off the bat. And once we get through everybody's chats or any chats related to the topics we're going to discuss, then we'll come back and get to everybody's 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th questions. So you can still keep sending them all in, and we really want you to. We'd love that. But in order to get everybody on the show, we're going to try to get through multiple people in order to, circle through the entire chat instead of it all being like pre-show chat and right at the beginning of the show chat. So that's to clarify. If you guys have any questions about that, let us know in the chat. Happy to clarify anything. Of course, we just want you guys to enjoy the show and keep enjoying talking about Star Wars with us. So pick your 2 most favorite things, send it in, and then after that, send in anything else you want, and we'll probably get to it based on the chat we have right now. We'll probably get to it by the end of tonight's show. Also, clarifying, super chats do always get your chats bumped up first, so super chats always come first, as well as member chats, which members of the $4.99 tier or above, as well as Patreon $4.99 tier or above members, get their chats prioritized. So if you would like to comment either on the Patreon post that we made of tonight's live stream, or in the stream we are able to tell who's a member and who's not, we will also prioritize your chats as well. So with all that, this is a work in progress. We're still kind of figuring out the format. We're really trying to experiment with these lives and make them the best they can be, especially as we work towards Andor season 2, which most likely will have pretty big lives and big chat rooms. We want to have this all ironed out and perfect before we get there, so a lot of you guys can enjoy all that. So bear with us over these next few weeks as we continue to try new things. But without further ado, let's just get into tonight's topics here. And let's start with the big one. This is a few days old. This did come out 4 days ago. Always comes out right after we stream. But we got news that George Nolfi, the writer of Bourne Ultimatum, Ocean's 12, a variety of other big blockbusters in Hollywood, is the next choice to pin the new Jedi Order movie for Ray and Daisy Ridley's new Jedi Order movie, directed by Charmin Obaid Chinoy. This is kind of a surprise to me, to be honest, because we had that whole story a month and a half ago or so about Simon Kinberg. We all speculated, okay, Simon Kinberg, if he is coming in, a lot of outlets speculated that he's writing and directing episodes, or he's writing and producing episodes 10, 11, and 12. So if that's the case, where does that leave the Ray movie? If Ray's involved in his movies, because there was another report that Ray's involved in the stories he's trying to tell, where does that leave this movie? Is this movie now 3 movies where it started as only 1 movie? Are they connected at all? So I think this kind of confirms that they're not really connected because Simon Kinberg's supposed to be writing those movies. He's not supposed to direct. So if he were not writing this movie, you would think that this isn't necessarily directly connected. So it's either going to be same time period, different story, or it's going to be maybe a movie that takes place far in the future, or his movies are taking place after this. But I think this kind of confirms that they're not really connected. Now, as for George Nolfi, I think he's a good pick. He seems like a really good writer, a lot of great action movies. Hasn't necessarily tackled sci-fi as much, so I'm interested to see how he does with sci-fi and especially a big, huge franchise like Star Wars. It seems to be one of the big problems with a lot of these writers is keeping all the lore together and where to push the lore next. So we'll see where he goes with that. But I still don't necessarily believe this is going to happen. I think this movie is ultimately gonna die. I don't really think this one's gonna get off the ground. We will see. Always positive to be adding a writer versus subtracting a writer, but, still don't have much faith in this one. But Sonic, you heard George Nolfi is the next director, or I mean, next writer for New Jedi Order. What are your thoughts on that?
I don't know much about him, to be fair. I think he's a little bit less notable than starting off
Yeah,
with, Stephen Knight as the second writer of this, right? And then a lot of the hype around that, what he did with Peaky Blinders, and what he could then do. The original writer, who I'm blanking on right now, the writer
Damon
behind
Lindelof.
Lost and Watchmen,
Damon
um,
Lindelof.
Lindelof, right? So
Yeah.
yeah, I just like it's he's not really a flashy guy, right? I don't think he's someone that I expect to be coming in and absolutely overhauling this script. I think he's more bringing it a little bit closer to the vision that's needed for this next chapter of Ray's character, right? And I mean, no matter what, if you love Ray, if you're indifferent to her, if you hate her, the next one is that everyone's kinda looking and seeing, like, what are you gonna do with her? Like, what is next step for her? And how are you gonna set her up to become a bit more of a richer character overall than what, sequels kinda ended off with, kind of putting her into that Palpatine legacy, when arguably it would've been nicer to just leave her as Rey Nobody and build off of a lot of what 7 and what Ryan Johnson built off in 8 as his explanations, his middle steps for her journey. So I know he did Bourne Ultimatum. I haven't seen the Bourne films either, but, I've heard that's quite a good sequel, and seems like
Mhm.
he's got a lot of experience with sequels specifically. So, I'm optimistic that because he's kinda coming in at what a sequel to the sequels, he'll be ready for this. He'll be kinda prepared, and whatever adjustments he's making will make the film a little bit more action-oriented, a little bit richer, have great dialogue as needed, and just, get it closer to where they wanted to be. I know this is, like, a little annoying, obviously, as Star Wars fans to be like, "Oh, it's happening again, like, another writer for a film," and all that. It's like, yeah, I get it. I really do, but I would rather make sure that this comes out at the right time, in the best shape possible, and works as a nice independent film and a bridge film to whatever is next, the possible 10 to 12. That's what Kinberg is working on. Maybe there's a bit more of a gap. Maybe that's 25, 30 years later. And this is just kind of like, let's figure out different things we can do to like set as foundations for Ray in live action. Okay, that worked out great. Let's tease Boyega back as Finn, maybe even have him play like a nice supporting role in like the final third or something. Bam, now you can flesh out more stuff with TVs and with animation and maybe some other spin-off stuff. You got to make this like middle chapter 2, potentially 10 and 12 under Kinberg work. We've been hearing and talking a lot about how it seems like they're really trying to focus on Ray seemingly being the character that has the most potential for public audiences perception for, like what can carry Star Wars forward, and you got to make that happen. And you got to make it happen by doing everything possible here. So, I hope Charmin gets to still direct this. I'd love to have her voice, especially with some of the stuff that I've seen from her documentaries. I do think that she was kinda handed some of the most difficult episodes of Miss Marvel that kinda lost some of its original glamour that the show started kicking off with. Definitely she could handle a lot heavier themes for sure, but how much of that is gonna be really applicable to what we're seeing here and to a Rey film that's gonna be her in her later 30s and stuff? Is that what this film is about, where she's a supporting character? Has it been changed to her being the lead again? We don't know, right? So whatever happens here, I'm trying to be optimistic, and I will be optimistic because I know we're gonna get at some point this Rey film, whether it be New Jedi Order or not. And I'm excited just to see her after, what will probably be like 10, 12 years at this rate, which, that's pretty freaking close to where we are with the supposed still that marker of
Yeah.
Rey 15 years older than she was in episode 9, which, I'm fine with. Take your time. I mean, we're not behind schedule, right? Like, it's not like the sequels where we've kinda had to go with the original trilogy cast, be like, "Okay, you guys are all closer to 70, but you have to be
Right.
50." It's like, "No, she's still younger. We got time with this, so focus on what you need to do, get the movies back in track, figure out how you close out, and build up from some of the missteps in the middle era of this Mandoverse. Close out that chapter. What is the next step for Disney Plus? What's the next step for TV? What's the next step for animation?" If this is just that part of that process of, like, reevaluating everything and making sure everything's locked in to a solid direction, I'm okay with that. So, yeah, I'm glad that this is out here now officially. I think we're already rumored, and the way Daisy Ridley was talking about it, she's like, was pretty excited. Yeah, no, we've already got, like, the next writer. I'm really happy with what I'm seeing. Now it's here officially for us to, kinda talk about.
Yeah, I think that's the next step is to look at Charmaine, not necessarily for any of her talents or abilities, but just the movie she signed on to is gotta be completely different than what she signed on to years ago, right? We're almost at the 2-year anniversary of them just announcing this. This movie was supposed to be out next year. Now, I think at best you're looking at 2028, 2029, especially if Sean Levy's movie is next in the pipeline, and Dawn of the Jedi is right after that. You're looking at 2028 at best, and that's 2 Star Wars movies in a year. So I think it'll be interesting to see how the creative team overall mixes with this because is this the same idea, but they're just getting a rewrite? Is it a completely new idea? Is it a completely new script? Is what they're working on with Simon Kinberg changing this story, and that's why they went with a new writer because now the story is completely changed because it's either a prequel to that, or it's a sequel to that, or it takes place in the middle of that. I think there's a lot of things that are up in the air, and we'll have to wait to see if they announce anything at Celebration this year. I desperately hope they don't, because I think that's their problem is don't announce something when your writer is just brought back on board and you're trying to figure out what it is. Announce it when it's going to come out and actually people are going to see it soon. And that's the big problem is this turns into a story purely because it's happened so many times where they've officially announced things that just never actually happen, and then they have to cancel them. So I hope they don't talk about this movie at all at Celebration. I hope they let this thing get going, and then whatever the next Celebration is, 2026, 2027, whatever it is, then they bring it back. They officially give us the creative team that's around it, director, writer, stars, give us a synopsis. Don't just tell us they're making something, actually do it because right now we just don't have a good track record with them making anything. So, like the 2 movies they've actually announced officially that weren't broken by trades have been the ones that have completely been falling apart with Rogue Squadron and New Jedi Order. Dawn of the Jedi's up in there. They don't really have a script yet, but they're supposedly shooting this year. Mandalorian and Grogu was broken by the trades, and then they announced it shortly after. That's the only one that seems to be well on track. So we'll see. We'll see how this goes. I mean, it's always a positive to be adding people to your team instead of subtracting people. But I'm not sure. I still don't buy that this is actually going to come out. And like you said, longer and longer we wait, that 15-year gap is actually just going to be the amount of time we waited in between Rise of Skywalker and the movie coming out. Because right now, what we're looking at with the release date for this is going to be 10 years after Rise of Skywalker. So that is kind of crazy to think about, the 10-year anniversary of Rise of Skywalker. It's already crazy to think about the 10-year anniversary of Force Awakens this year. But thank you so much to Kylie Stewart, who sent in a super chat, or is this Kylie Stewart's son again? Either one, thank you so much for sending in your super chat. Kylie Stewart says, will Obi-Wan Kenobi come to Ahsoka, do you think? This is definitely in reference to a story we were going to briefly talk about last week. I think we did kind of incorporate it into some of the stuff we were talking about with Natalie Portman. But when it comes to Ewan McGregor possibly returning as Obi-Wan Kenobi, I think it's a much stronger possibility than Natalie Portman for a couple reasons. One, Obi-Wan can exist in multiple forms. It doesn't have to just be a flashback, right? So you can do Obi-Wan as a Force Ghost. We saw Anakin Force Ghost at the end of Ahsoka season 1, so you could do an Obi-Wan Force Ghost if you had to. Obi-Wan was involved in the events of Mortis, which seems to be one of the main focuses of season 2. So his appearance, even in a Mortis flashback or something related to Mortis, absolutely could make sense for that story. And then the third thing is that Ahsoka spent a lot of time with Obi-Wan, more time than she spent with Padme, even though Padme did have a lot of time with Ahsoka in season 3. Obi-Wan was in almost every episode that Ahsoka was in with Anakin, so Obi-Wan was a much bigger figure in her life, and I think if you did a flashback to the Clone Wars again, it'd make a lot more sense for Obi-Wan to be there than Padme. So I think Obi-Wan's a very strong possibility. Ewan McGregor being around Star Wars so much lately, his wife, Mary Elizabeth Winstead, plays Hera in that show, so I'm sure he wouldn't turn down a role in the same show as her. I think he's very open to Star Wars, and I would give it. I'm going to give it like a 70% chance of happening, 75% chance of happening. I really do think the Obi-Wan one is pretty on point.
I mean, that's pretty high. I just wouldn't 100% trust it yet. And I'm closer to maybe like a 55, 60, just because we all kind of thought that we'd start to get Ben Kenobi with the Obi-Wan Kenobi show, and then you're like, wow, his hair is even better than before. Oh man, he's got a beard, it's a little ragged. Okay, wrinkles around the eyes. So it's funny because I think a huge thing about, like, if you look at the episode 3 documentary behind the scenes, you see, like, how they're taking old Alec Guinness and how he looked in A New Hope, matching up his nose, his eye, his hair, and everything, right? So well, not really the hair. At that point, I don't think Obi-Wan really cares, but, it he seemingly was, like, on track, right? Like, "Oh, yeah, we've gotten all the features, like, lined up now. It's just a matter of you aging into them." And he has aged into it, but they really were like, "Well, you're still in Hollywood, so we're gonna keep you looking Hollywood," which I don't mind, other than l this was a great opportunity with season 1 to, like, have aged him a lot closer to that Alec Guinness look. So,
Yeah.
I don't know if they tried it and it just didn't really work the way they wanted to, or they just felt like, "No, it's okay. We'll just say that, like, once he starts his force training and he starts detaching from, like, the mortal realm a little bit and comes closer to becoming possibly more powerful than you could possibly imagine," right? Like, once he gets to that stage of his life where he's, just ready for, like, training Luke and then going to the next realm of existence, right? Maybe that's when he doesn't care. Maybe he's meditating out in the Tatooine sun instead of hiding in caves and being all mopey and depressed, right? Which for a good reason. Um, yeah, and then maybe that's how you're gonna age it. But there was always that weird that gap between episode 3 and 4. You're like, it doesn't make sense with the original actor's age. And they had a chance already. They had a huge chance to, and they didn't there. So I think that's what keeps me, like, hold back, like, will they really do it for Ahsoka? I know we've got, like, another 14, 15 years or something like that at this point, and yeah, or sorry, 9 years, but 10, I don't know, it's they still haven't nailed the years in Mandoverse yet, but regardless, another decade or so, and can we do it now? Has he aged up to that point with the makeup, maybe going for a little bit more of the Force Ghost, Force Spirit kind of look where it's like blue, semi-transparent? Does it
Mhm.
then allow you to play off that look a lot more convincingly? who knows, right? Like it's a weird thing for me where I can't tell if it's a matter of like it's a choice or if they simply don't think that he's there yet looks wise. And I don't know. I mean, we've seen some incredible makeup and incredible prosthetics over film history. Like, forget about just Star Wars and like more recent times with animatronics and all that. No, we've seen it since the 50s, the 60s, since black and white. So I don't really see why it can't happen. But I feel like there's some sort of hesitancy around Lucasfilm right now. Like, oh, like if we do that, then once he finally gets to that age, he'll kind of not match up. And we, if we ever want to go back to like portraying him during the time period would kinda run into the somewhat the same issues that, Ian McDiarmid's having where you see him in episode 3 and then how you see him in episode 6 and then you see him in Obi-Wan Kenobi. There's, like, these variations, but that one I think can play off a little bit more as, like, hey, it's just the dark side, he's in some periods of training or getting deeper into lore, like, something's affected him that he's, ruined his body a little further or he hasn't regenerated or something. With Obi-Wan, I don't know if you can do it that same way convincingly. I'm sure you can, but then the whole deep fake question, are we gonna put Alec Guinness on Ewan McGregor? That just feels wrong because the whole point of Ewan McGregor at that point was, well, first of all, you're not even thinking about it, but it's because he'll age into that look. So it's a weird one for me. I can't tell why. I think there's a lot of reasons they can and can't do it. So that's why I'm a little lower on it, but I would still like it. Don't get me wrong. I think it would work, especially since it's all Mortis stuff seemingly where he'd be attached to. But it's all work in progress. And then if he does appear and they're doing it as close to the Mortis arc as possible, maybe he is just like fleshed out. Like, it just seems like he's kind of got some wispiness, kind of like how Qui-Gon does when he appears. So, but he, for the most part, just looks like he's fully mortal, fully alive, and it's just like a weird cave scene or something.
Yeah, I think the reason I'm higher on it for sure is just all the different roles he can play. The fact that he can be in flashbacks, some type of force vision, some type of force ghost. I think he can be any of it, and so I'd bet on him appearing just for even for like a shot or a scene like Captain Rex, where it's just a
Mhm.
brief, like he's there. I think with Hayden being there and Hayden seemingly now one of his best friends again, he's everywhere. He's coming to his Hollywood Walk of Fame, giving him Hollywood Walk of Fame speech for Ewan McGregor. Like they're actually friends and not just like, oh, we enjoyed working together. Like they actually seem like friends. So I think between Hayden, his wife, the fact that he wants to be around Star Wars more, maybe this will be like a, "Hey, I do this favor for you guys, maybe you get me Obi-Wan season 2 coming soon." I could see just
Yeah.
anything like that. I think Filoni probably scratched a big, nerd itch to work with Hayden Christensen again, or for the first time, now getting to work with Ewan McGregor as well. I think that would be pretty cool. So I'm maybe I'm just overly positive because I want Obi-Wan in it because he's my favorite character, but, yeah, I think, I really do think he's going to be in it. But yeah, thank you so much for the super chat, Kylie Stewart. We really appreciate it. Let's go through a couple more chats here and then we'll get to our second topic for the day. Star Wars Order says, "Will you guys be going to Celebration Japan?" No, we will not. Or I can confirm I will not be. Sonic, I don't think you are either. Um,
I'm more than likely not going.
yeah, we're actually looking for somebody. If you are going Star Wars Order, let us know because we're looking for somebody who might want to report to us on some of the things that they saw there. So let us know if you are going, but we're not planning on going to Celebration this year. Hopefully, it'll be back in the United States next year. Star Wars Order also says, "Are you guys excited for Andor season 2?" I think excited's an understatement. Certainly, one of the things I've
Yeah.
looked forward to the most out of all Star Wars projects recently. I think up there with Mandalorian season 3 and season 2. It's hard to get as excited for something that's new as something that is a sequel, right? Because you know what's coming. You know the product that you're hoping to get a second time in a different way, right? So Andor season 2, I think, is amongst my most anticipated seasons of Star Wars TV. I'm so excited for it, and I can't wait. It's 12 episodes, so hopefully that's like 11 weeks or so of content that we get to talk about it with you guys. I cannot wait for that season to drop.
Yeah, excited, like Liam said, is an understatement. I think especially with, how we've been feeling, especially after watching Skeleton Crew, how we were both pleasantly surprised by how well that journey went. it's nice to be again on like a nice upward climb for hype and excitement with Star Wars. Acolyte, we both came in with a lot of hype, obviously went down for both of us, one of us a lot more, the other just stuck dead center at worst, at best, however you want to look at it. So, we weren't super pleased with where Acolyte ended up being. But Skeleton Crew got us to a place where like, yeah, that was really good. It's kind of sad it was delayed a whole year, but it felt worth it. Like it felt like it got some nice little extra polish, gives the time for the kids to kind of grow up and do a little bit more media training and all that. And I wish there was more media for it, more trailers, more promos, right? There's just nothing. It's kind of dumped out there. So hoping the word of mouth really kicks in and we start
Mhm.
hearing Nielsen and Illuminate say, "Oh yeah, it started cracking in the last 2-3 weeks into uh, some of the top 10 lists and stuff like that." Maybe, maybe not. But we're pretty positive where that is. And Andor, I mean, yeah, it's hard not to be. I think a good show people can compare it to is like Arcane season 2. Everyone was like shocked by Arcane, like, where did that come from? And that's the same feeling
Mhm.
that Andor had. And I'm saying this as someone who hasn't watched it, just heard a lot from friends. I kind of kept any allegiance to League to a minimum since my high school days. I'm kind of not trying to get sucked back into that toxic hellscape. But people were like, "Oh, I've never like played League or anything, but it's such a great show." And then season 2, they're like, "Oh, it was like really, really good," but then it started adding some weird things, like whole new plot lines, and like it slimmed down other ones, and like just kind of ignored some stuff and pushed it to like a possible second show or something. And I don't think we're gonna run into that same exact problem with, Andor season 2. I think what's nice about Andor season 2 is that from the start, they're like, "Yeah, we could have done 5 a year for each, year leading up into Rogue One and Cassian's life. We don't want to. We really realistically can't do that, but we're gonna make 2 seasons and each block of episodes that's gonna get us to another year and another year and another year. So I think there's a little bit more intentionality from the start from Gilroy and his crew that, hey, this is our second and last season. We'll introduce a lot of things, but we're not necessarily gonna make new crazy like tangents that are like suddenly gonna be like, oh, another show has addressed this in the New Republic era or some other period. And there's no space for it, right? So this is like build up the elements that make most sense to lead directly into Rogue One. If some characters live that we didn't all expect to live, okay, cool. Maybe they can appear further down the line or something. Plenty of these original characters could definitely die, right? But it doesn't really seem like we're gonna be thrown into like a okay, there's a whole new tangent here, and now we got like to figure out a whole different story that happened concurrently and it's gonna, like, deal with the last 3, 4 months leading into Rogue One and New Hope. I don't see that, and I think because of that intentionality, I think Andor season 2 can still be great, but it will definitely be different than season 1 and people who felt very drawn into that methodical storytelling, like we both were for sure. I'm expecting it to be tonally as close as possible. But there's gonna be just a totally different vibe with the
Yeah.
fact that the story is just jumping every year.
Yeah, it should be a lot more fast-paced, which I think this could be a good marriage of the things that people really loved about Andor with a style that's more accessible to uh, people who didn't like Andor. Because people forget with how big of a hit Andor was, how much we heard when those first 5, 6 episodes were coming out. Oh, this is the most boring show I've ever watched. I can't believe they made Star Wars so boring. And then the heist happens, and then after that, everybody kind of got on board, right? So
Yeah.
now I think with the 4 episode arcs, you've got the ability to keep that drama, but at the same time make the plots and the conflicts quicker. This could be the perfect thing for Andor, for all audiences. But at the same time, there is that concern that what worked so well in the first one, are we rushing it too much in the second one? But we will see. Hopefully, it's great. I'm expecting it to be great. They certainly took their time getting it out. It's been 3 years, so uh, it's not like they were like, "Oh no, Andor's a hit. We got to get season 2 out." And they made it in like a year and it's lesser quality. This is the plan. They've always had this plan and they made it in a significant amount of time and I'm expecting the same quality or better. So thank you so much for that chat. And let's get into our second story here as more people continue to send in your chats. And again, if you're just joining us, send in your chats. This is a show powered by your chats. So send them into the chat. And to re-clarify what I said earlier in the chat and what I clarified at the beginning of the show, we want you to send in as many chats as you like. It's just we're going to answer the same person's first two chats, get to the next people. Once we've gotten through everybody, we'll go back to your other chats. So, like somebody like Critical Thinker has sent in multiple chats. We're going to get to all of his chats at the end. And then we will get to his first two chats first, and then get to the rest of them at the end. So all of the other people in the chat, you're welcome to send in as many things as you would like. And then we're going to keep going over these topics for the day. And if you would like to comment on the topics, we always bring your comments into the discussion on the topics as well. All right, let's get into the next big topic, which especially was big for us. And this was really revealed today. And that is the Trials of the Jedi cover and story details. We've been waiting for this forever. It feels crazy that it's been so long. We've had covers for so many other things in the High Republic for so long, right? I was re-editing that live stream we did a while ago at the beginning of the year talking about our most anticipated things of 2025, and while I was re-editing, I was looking for pictures of Trials of the Jedi, and I realized we don't actually have a cover still. We only have that initial image that they gave us in 2022 or so, 2021, when they announced all the phases of High
Yeah.
Republic. That's all we had for Trials of the Jedi because they called the whole phase 3 Trials of the Jedi. And now we finally have a cover, and I really love this cover. I told you earlier, Sonic, this is for me like a top 3 to 4 High Republic cover. I absolutely love the colors. I love the characters, the way they're put on here. I love the out armor with the robes. It all looks so good. The colors of the lightsabers juxtaposed with the colors on the cover itself. This is it's Light of the Jedi-esque in the art style of the characters. Like they went back to that same art style. And I don't know who the artist is. I wish I did so I could give him credit, but it is beautiful and I absolutely love it and very excited. Light of the Jedi is still my favorite High Republic book, so I cannot wait for this. It's Charles Soule. I want to know what happens. We've been reading this for 4 years. I want to know what happens in Trials of the Jedi, so I'm very excited we have some piece of art, a cover to finally get excited about. Let me read to you all the story details we got today about Trials of the Jedi. And here we go. This is from IO9. Trials of the Jedi sees the Jedi draw a line in the sand against Marchion Ro and the Nile, preparing to show down with the would-be tyrant after the Nile's war on the galaxy has left the Republic divided. But while the threat of Ro is one thing, the threat of the force-devouring creatures, known as the Nameless, that Ro has unleashed on the galaxy are a crisis even more existential to the Order and Republic alike. As the Jedi prepare to face their greatest test in centuries of galactic history, just 9 of them, chosen by Avar Kriss and Elzar Mann, are tasked on a do-or-die mission. Head to the Nameless's homeworld, discover the secrets of the creature's connection to the Force, and find a way to stop their ravaging blight from spreading across the whole Republic. Oh, and then save the galaxy from Ro and his legions. That should be no problem for a Jedi Order at the height of their power, right? That's pretty exciting. Now we know what this book is actually about. And with those details, now, Sonic, you hear that, you see the cover. What are your thoughts on all the information we just learned about Trials of the Jedi?
Well, I want to start off with just the art. Like you said, it's super good. Like it's fantastic. I think there was that tease last week where Charles Soule just like showed the bottom with his like name or something. And it's like, okay, we get some idea what some colors might be used, but nothing about the characters, no armor, nothing, right? And now we finally got it. And yeah, like you said, kind of harkens back to Light of the Jedi. But I think, like, even from then, they've kind of, like, subtly mastered what they were going for in phase 1, just a little bit more emphasis, a little bit more flair. I like a lot of the phase 1 covers, uh, but I don't think they were always, like, super impressive to me, like,
Yeah.
Into the Light, in some ways, I thought it was, like, a really good cover, but sometimes there's just, like, a lot of empty space on it that I'm like, "You coulda done a little bit more there." And then, phase 2, I will say, not a huge fan of the adult novel covers. I
Me
was
either.
very happy with Path to Deceit and Path to Vengeance. Those are some really great covers and as good as I'd expect for a young adult novel. It's a nice how the adult novels kinda combine, like, Fontuzen and, not Fontuzen, sorry, Axel and, uh,
Jella. Yeah.
Gela yeah, the Jedi that the will they, won't they, does she even realize sort of relationship that they've got there, and it's a nice combo there. But Phase 3 has been knockouts, like, from the start. It's been so good, like, it I've been thoroughly impressed. I mean, Edge of Darkness, like, that first cover, Markion just seated on the throne. So good. Even Defy the Storm, I thought, like, the way, like, having the main characters kinda stick out from the crowd, some great stuff there. Uh, I mean, I guess you could say Escape from Val, Oh, and Beware the Nameless is very much the same as the rest of the junior novels, so I'll give them credit for keeping that continuity, but, yeah, I thought this one was good. Temptation of the Force, it's probably the weakest cover, in my opinion, for Phase
Yeah,
3.
I
Um
agree.
you can understand why, because it is really that focus on Elzar and Avar, and it is their story, it is that romance, but it's not super stylistic in the same way that, you know, this very first one is gonna be in this final one of the adult trilogy here, and yeah, I mean, it's great, and there's some cool details, obviously, they're all kinda in this, like, battle armor, going to Planet X, the nameless planet, presumably. And it's the same look that she has when Avar was first subtly introduced in the Rise of Kylo Ren comic with one of the Jedi apprentices, Hennix, kinda seeing a message from her in one of the holograms about, like, keeping the hope and, like, doing what you can do, right? The faith in darkness, so, it'll be interesting to see the context of her recording the holocron or if that's kinda like one of those quasi things that's, like, sort of like a scan of their memory and their personality, like how some holocrons can be. I'm very curious which one it's ultimately gonna be, but it does make me think, is she saying that as like her goodbye message? Is she saying that as like a survivor? It's a lot to be determined from that one. And though as a completionist of the High Republic, the thing that got me really hyped was seeing Ty York on the cover
Mhm.
and in the Jedi armor, because she's got her lightsaber, sure, but she's not really a Jedi, She's had kind of the Monster Temple Peak and then the second Comic Run, which was much better than the first and redeemed a lot of Monster from Temple Peaks and kind of its blander moments for me. But I mean, for most people, the last time you've seen her is in the Rising Storm. So for her to be back here with this look, questions about like, is there going to be any tension with that like very strong force bond that her and Elzar established in that book, and then not really any follow up in the books for that. Is she gonna kind of come back here and have more of a reconnection to the Jedi Order and her Jedi heritage, since she really got over a lot of the traumas of her origin as a Jedi in her two comic runs? Very interesting that she would be selected, presumably, to be one of the 9, right? Because you could have just put in another Jedi or, like, a senior Jedi on the council or something, but to go for someone who's not and to be selected by, yeah, Avar and Elzar, like, that's pretty fascinating to me. I think this crew will be just so fun to watch, just these 9. It just feels like the right amount to keep them still focused in the way that we get, like, from Fallen Star, where everything's in the same place, the same locations, but the variety of experiences, the fact that this is the concluding chapter and we've watched all of these characters grow in the books or in some sort of medium, yeah, I'm fascinated, I'm excited, wow, I'm it's coming, it's finally coming after so many delays, and I really have been such a fan. I know we were both so excited, it came out 2021, we both still talk about how Celebration 22, it was just so insane to see just how much love there was for the High Republic panel and everyone there. Maybe it's tapered off a little bit with how their faces kind of released a little bit more spread out, but I would not be surprised if a lot of people with this cover alone feel like, let's bite the bullet, buy a ticket for Celebration Japan, and make like one huge last hurrah for this final run of the High Republic's at least first multimedia initiative.
Yeah, and there's some information here from Charles Soule that also continues to get me hyped for sure. He recently was able to comment on the book, and he said, Trials of the Jedi is an epic. The stakes are as high as they possibly could get. The Jedi we've come to know and love are facing impossible challenges that could end with not just the destruction of their order, but the galaxy as a whole. I mean, obviously, we know that's not going to happen. The Jedi and their allies step up to defend the light, even when all around them is darkness. I wrote it to grab readers from page one and never let go. It's intense stuff, a tale of great heroism and sacrifice. So that gets me excited too. I mean, one of my biggest complaints with Phase 3 so far has been the fact that the way they've spread out these books, the way they've spread out Phase 3, and the way they've spread out Phase 1 to Phase 3, almost everything starts with like a 5-chapter recap of everything else that happened in a book that came out 3 years ago, and, I just hope that this one really does just get straight into it. Let's just get into the story. If I mean, I feel like at this point, the way they should treat readers is similar to how, like, New Jedi Order and a lot of those initiatives treated readers, which is like, if you're not reading it, then you've gotta go read the other stuff. You're not gonna jump on board in book 12, like, you gotta start you gotta read the whole thing.
Yeah.
So, I'm tired of them pretending like we're gonna get somehow get new readers on, like, the what is this gonna be? This will be the 8th adult book in the High Republic. You're not gonna get new readers on the 8th book. So, hopefully, it's directed at the fans who have been waiting for a long time, who've been interested in this whole thing. And when I look at this cover too, I'm also struck by how Elzar Mann's side profile does look a lot like Channing Tatum to me. But I never saw that before in a lot of his other work. But yeah, those are our thoughts on Trials of the Jedi. Let us know what you guys think. I know not a lot of you are huge High Republic people, but some of you are. Some of you have said that you guys have watched High Republic. We have our kind of contingent of fans for sure who comment on all our reviews, who are big High Republic people. But I'm not sure how many of the people in the chat tonight are interested in the High Republic. But we really wanted to talk about that because that's something that we really love and we have carried on this channel since literally day one of this channel. So looking forward to it ending. It's definitely going to mark a big milestone in our Star Wars coverage for sure. Let's get back to the chat here. And again, keep sending in your chats if you'd like them answered tonight. We will go through all of them. First come, first serve. Super chats get bumped up to the top. And if you are a member of the $5 tier on memberships on YouTube or Patreon, you can comment here and we will bump yours up to the top as well. There's a post on Patreon that you can comment on. And I've been checking that post frequently. And if anybody comments on there, I will bring your chat up tonight for the stream. All right. Let's get back to the chat. And I believe we were next with Critical Thinker, who said, what would you do with the canon Old Republic? Should they keep the old stuff mostly intact or do their own spin on old stuff or reinvent the whole era? Would you want a show, a book, a multimedia project? Thank you so much for that question. It's a question we've talked about a lot. And it's one that I still do mean to do like a full deep dive on like one of those how to adapt series episodes about the old republic because I've had ideas for this like as long as all the way back to like our origins on this channel. Like you can go back and watch some of the early videos and I've thrown out things about the old republic way back then. But for me, I think the main thing they have to do is condense the era. And that's not to say that the old republic doesn't work well as a long era. It can still be really long. It could still be 1,000, 2,000 years long if they want it to be. But right now, the old republic that we look at is like about 4,000 to 5,000 years long. And it's too much. There's too much time there for one era. I mean, to put it in perspective, right? The republic that we know of, the not old republic before the empire, right? That's only 1,000 years. So the old republic is quadruple the length of that. And then, not to mention, Dawn of the Jedi takes place 20,000 years before that. And they also have like kind of similar looking spaceship designs, technology. The Rakata are involved and their technology plays a role, and that's the Old Republic. So there's a lot of crossover eras that are so spread out in time and doesn't really make that sense that there's not that in a highly advanced society, we don't have advanced technology, advanced storylines, advanced timelines for so long, and then one of our most advanced periods is only 1,000 years long versus 5,000 years of the same thing, right? So I would condense it, and I would take personally the heavy hitters out of the legend stuff. I would take your Malik, I would take your Revan, I would take your Bastila, I would take your Sotil, I would take Malgus, I would even take the Sith Emperor and do him in a little bit more grounded way. I would take those big characters and I would restructure a story to make them all a little bit more tightly knit together, where things built off each other a little bit quicker. Make it an era of massive conflict, but maybe not an era that's spread out over 5,000 years of massive conflict. Maybe make it an era where every 50 or 100 years there's a new massive conflict. Build on that, build on the ideology. And I think you need to connect it a little bit closer to the origins of the Jedi. I think you need to connect it a little bit closer to the dawn of the Jedi, the initial schism between the Jedi and Sith. I think all those things need to happen more closely together because, w like I've said before about Dawn of the Jedi, I don't care about caveman Jedi. Like, I don't wanna see that. I want Star Wars to be a space epic all the time. I don't want to see people discovering how to go to space. I don't want to see people discovering how to get across a planet and building a spaceship. Like, I don't wanna do any of that. So when we get to Dawn of the Jedi, I want it to be a spacefaring movie. Like, I don't want it to be pre-space. So when we get to that, the technology, if we have enough technology to get around in different planets in space, I think you can accelerate it to the point where you get to Old Republic within 5,000 years of Dawn of the Jedi instead of 20,000 years. So that would be one of the big things I would do. Then I would also connect Bane a little closer as well. We're like right now where we have Bane in Legends, he's like 1,500 to 2,000 years after the events of the Old Republic. And I think he should be after the events of the Sith Emperor, after the events of all those things, when the Sith Empire falls, when the Brotherhood of Darkness rises, to ultimately Bane's destruction of the Brotherhood of Darkness. I think it should be a lot closer. I think Bane should be more of an aftermath of the big ultimate destruction of the Sith Empire. It shouldn't be these hundreds of years of the Brotherhood of Darkness trying to reclaim some foothold. I think it should come fairly quickly. I think it would be better. And if you were doing a TV show, and I know you asked the version I would do of this, I personally think the HBO style Game of Thrones looking TV show is the best way to do this type of story. You could do movies, it would give it a bigger production value. It would look great if Disney Plus could somehow figure out a way to make their Star Wars stuff look as good as Game of Thrones. And I know we had this whole conversation last week about how one of the big differences is you can reuse sets or you can shoot practically with Game of Thrones. That saves you money. You can shoot on location versus everything in Star Wars has to either be manufactured as a in a studio, has to be created digitally, has to you have to create all these different worlds. Even if you do shoot on location, you have to make them look like different worlds. You have to create these costumes, all those things. If they could find a way to elevate the budgets of their show to the point where they could give us Game of Thrones level in terms of budget, in terms of length of episode, in terms of character development, writing, all of that, anything HBO style, I think the show would be the best version. I mean, books would be hypothetically the best because you could do anything, but I don't think it would be disappointing, even as a huge book lover. It would be disappointing if the story of KOTOR, which is so visually impressive and dependent, because it's mostly been done in video games and comics, if that was now taken and put into just a non-visual medium, right? So I would be a little disappointed. I want it to be multimedia no matter what, but I think the show should be the centerpiece. And I think by condensing the eras, then you could build show after show into each other to where you start at point A, you do Mandalorian Wars, you do Revan, you do those characters, and you take it all the way to point D and end it with Bane. And I think that would be ideally the way you could do it. I mean, we live in an imperfect world, and it's not gonna happen, but, I would really I think that would be the perfect way to do it. Condense it, people will get pissed off, it doesn't matter. Condense it, make it great, and as long as you keep the core of who each character is, as long as you keep the core of the story and you do it in a way that embraces I've always said that Legends adaptations should be that, right? They should be adaptations. You don't need to pull a character from Legends and then make their story completely different because that's not really an adaptation. That's more of a like an inspiration, right? An adaptation would be how do we get the spirits and how do we get the main beats of the character's journey or the story's journey and recreate that for a new generation. That's what I think they need to try to do with the Old Republic if you're going to do these characters. They're not going to do that, if they're just going to say, well, Revan is now this random guy who does this different stuff and has nothing to do with Mandalorian Wars and has nothing to do with Malik and different era, then don't do Revan. Just do new characters, and I would prefer them to do new characters altogether if they're not going to embrace elements that make these characters who they are. But yeah, that's my long-winded, my long-winded example. That's something I've thought about for years, but a lot of outlines for. One day I'll do a full video on it. But Sonic, what do you think? How would you do the Old Republic?
It's tough. I mean, because in some ways I come from it in a bit of a different angle too, because I played KOTOR 1 so many times, KOTOR 2 like a couple times, but maybe I don't think I've ever properly finished start to finish. That one I think I've gotten like super close to the final battle, but yeah, I mean, it's a landmark. It's a landmark when it comes to Star Wars history and all that. And it came out during the golden age of Star Wars gaming. It also came out during a period of time where they had a great game come out, and then they're like, "Oh, people loved it. In a year from now, we're gonna have the next game," which was just an insane turnaround even for that time. And you know, it's crazy that you can say KOTOR 2 has a better story than 1, even though it's a far inferior game with how much of it was cut out before they literally relied on modders 10, 15 years later to restore it to its potential glory, right? So, I think in some ways, it's still not really real to me, KOTOR 2, and because it feels very different than 1, and there's a weird gap there that then the Revan book kinda comes into, and you're like, "Ah, but now you're just making this an Old Republic tie-in." People really didn't like how Carpishian, like, handled the exile versus Revan and even Revan's story, and it's like, "Oh, okay." This just feels like Old Republic just prologue at best, right? So and, you could say the Old Republic is in some ways beloved at later Legends establishment, but I don't really remember a lot of, like, love for, like, the Revanchists, the 2 spirits of Revan, the light side, the dark side, right? Like, it went off the rails. I know people like, Knights of the Eternal Empire because it's like, "Oh, this is, like, a totally new aesthetic and all that," and, like, everyone loved cinematics with that game, and even anytime we get a new one, it's cool, it's awesome. But it's and, it's just not it for me. I'm just like, it's just so vastly gone and to a different direction that I wouldn't want anything really of the Old Republic. Maybe a couple characters, but just in name only, right? So, there's that. There's what I think about KOTOR 1 and 2 not exactly being symbiotic. The only thing that I ever truly find symbiotic is Tales of the Jedi, the comics from Dark Horse by Tom Veitch. I think they came out just before or just after Dark Empire. I think just after Dark Empire, and
Mhm.
I don't think it's incredible. Like, having read through all of them finally after, like, bits and pieces throughout my childhood, I thought there's a lot that I love, right? I doubled down on my love of Ulic Droma. I found a lot of the alchemy and a lot of the stuff on Korriban really fascinating. But then I would also struggle with, like, a lot of the early adventures of Ulic Qel-Droma. I'm like, "Okay, what's going on here? Why is Exar Kun just kind of elevated to such an equal status without any sort of backstory with him and with his master and all that?" There's some weird things about it for sure, and I can kinda attest it a little bit more to comics. But the biggest thing that to this day throws me off is that that came out first, and then KOTOR somehow is trying to say, like, "Oh, this is only 30 years after." And it just there's no lining up. If anything, you need to spread out that gap period and then shrink everything else. That's what I would say. But like Liam said, it has to be condensed. It's a question of how archaic are they gonna go versus how much is it gonna be paralleling a little bit more of the prequel era, a little bit more of, like, our modern Star Wars sensibilities that we've seen from the prequels, that we've seen from the originals and the sequels, right? How familiar is the tech gonna be? How familiar are the organizations, the groups, the people, right? That's gonna be tough because KOTOR really by 2 is literally has Jedi wearing prequel trilogy robes, and you're like, "This is 4,000 years before. How is this the same?" Right? I'm not saying 1 had an incredible aesthetic for the Jedi, but it was still different, right? So, think you gotta figure out, like, which direction are you trying to go, and like Liam said, I too would agree with going with something that's a little closer to Dawn of the Jedi in connection, and aesthetic, and style. Lean a little bit more on the Rakutans and, like, the influence of that onto the Sith Empire, onto the great schisms that occur. There's so many things you can do. I think you can keep KOTOR mostly intact, and yes, you could say, like, "Oh, but people already know about the whole twist with Revan." That doesn't mean it's still not a good twist for people if you play it right, TV medium, like, that can still
Right.
definitely happen. HBO level writing, production, longer episodes for sure, 'cause the storytelling in the Old Republic era is mostly, like, and where you can kinda, like, talk. You can have a lot of time during travels, a lot of downtime learning and relearning and remembering stuff, right? I'd love to see all that stuff. I'd love to see the Star Forge as a concept because it's still
Hmm.
super unique compared to, like, destroying everything. It's like, well, we're kinda creating out of it, right? So, that's super fascinating to me. Like, there's a lot of elements there that I think could still play and just be adapted straight up. But post KOTOR 2 and whatever you do to, like, make that work and the connections with the Tales of the Jedi to make more sense, I'm kind of open to it being a clean slate until, you know, where we are with Bane and the Brotherhood of Darkness. You can give cameos for Satele, you can talk about some other things. I just never found that as appealing or anywhere close to where a KOTOR 3 would have gone anyways, so it was just the BioWare wanted to do a multiplayer game as, like, semi-sequel to KOTOR, and then it just went in wildly different directions once canon reset and everything happened, so I don't look at all that stuff really. Maybe Knight Errant, but only as, like, a side story, like, it should be like an auxiliary project at best, so, yeah, I would say KOTOR, a lot more tie into Tales of the Jedi, and then KOTOR with whatever original stuff you wanna do leading into the Bane trilogy, and then squeeze it in. We know it ends at the 1,000-year mark, nice and clean, at least that what the comics are implying. I think it all makes a lot more sense that way, personally, but, it's all to be determined. And then lastly, you gotta put a little bit more emphasis on, like, the Mandalorians with how much canon's developed them with, like, Tar Vizsla and everything, so
Yeah.
this is a great chance to, like, flesh out the variety, kind of canonize a lot of stuff that, would make sense in, like, open season and stuff like that, but then makes sense also with the Clone Wars, right? There's a great way to just have multiple different tribes, multiple different things coming and going. You could still have the Ultimate, you could still have Indomitable, but maybe their roles are a little bit more reflective of, like, how the Mandalorians really aren't super unified during this period of time where they should theoretically have been or gotten close to destroying their home planet at this point.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. The Mandalorians need to play a huge role, and they do, but it's mostly off screen or in the
Yeah.
comics. So, um, yeah, I think there's so many things they can do with it, and we'll run down these comments too that are about it. Like Chris says, hard to do the core KOTOR story without massive negativity from fan base. And I kind of referenced it in my spiel, but you're going to have massive negativity no matter what you do, unless you literally remake the KOTOR game frame for frame with newer graphics like Final Fantasy 7 did and expand upon it, right? That's the only way you don't get massive negativity. So there's going to be negativity. There'll be negativity if they were to announce my version of it, there would be negativity. There would be negativity until the first episode came out. There'd probably still be negativity. But ideally, if they did it perfectly, let's just say in a hypothetical world and it's just perfect, by the time you got to the final episode of season one, I think enough people would be able to see what they were going for that you'd start to be able to separate the two. There will
Yeah.
always be people who will be pissed off no matter what because it's not the same thing that they remember. And that's fine. You're going to have to, I mean, we just have to move on from those types of people, right? I mean, we'll still always have the game. So Legends is not coming back as the main timeline. It's separated, and we're lucky we still have that timeline. Like, I always treat them as 2 timelines. So,
Yeah.
I have my Legends timeline, and I can read my Legends books and comics and still enjoy and love that timeline. Even I wish they made new stories. I've gone on that whole rant in the past. I wish they had new books, new comics, new things in that timeline, and then maybe the movies and stuff just stuck to the canon timeline, or they even had their own separate Legends universe for movies. But, you're never gonna because I think that would appease those people who are gonna be mad about doing KOTOR and canon, right? If you had Legends still as a primary timeline, if you did an adaptation that was Legends specific, you could do your own version in canon, and less people will be upset because you're giving credence to the Legends version. You're not just adapting the small elements, right? So that's one thing. And then Chris says, I think the KOTOR remake is the move to make it canon, but who knows if it exists. And that's the thing too, is like I would love it as a video game as well. I'm always somebody who kind of prefers keeping to that original form. If they were to make the KOTOR remake just straight up canon, I'd be cool with that. I think they just might need to move the years around and mess with that. That's the main like canon change I think they could make. And then Chris also says you lose the amnesia plot almost entirely due to lack of Revan, and you would. The only way I could see you being able to keep that is if Revan was almost entirely masked before, and then you had another actor play Revan unmasked as the good version, right? So
Yeah.
you could kind of keep that story, but the problem will be if you cast anybody famous as Revan outside of just being a voice, then everybody's going to know who it is, obviously. So what you'd kind of have to do would be like a Mandalorian type thing where you cast somebody as Revan and they only voice perform, and then you have the Revan in the mask the entire time. And then once he gets the amnesia, then you cast somebody else as Revan and they play the Jedi version. But then, you would have to do that story prior to doing any of the Jedi Revan stuff. And I would prefer kind of seeing the Jedi Revan stuff because I think it would be impactful to have the fall of Revan and then the reclamation of Revan as one big story rather than in flashbacks. So that's how I would kind of do it. You'd have to lose the twist, but the twist would still be there for game players or people who wanted to play the game if you were doing the show. So again, that's another hurdle you have to deal with. But if you're going to touch that story, you got to deal with those things at some point. And then the Chris says, how would you structure a KOTOR HBO series, though? Like I said, no amnesia twist, and it's difficult to do KOTOR 2 with a whole new cast. The KOTOR MMO plot just ain't happening on TV either. And it's the same thing like I mentioned earlier. Like you just have to create a show that didn't focus on one game. It would be
Yeah.
something that crisscrossed. You'd have Mitra Surik in episodes of like the Jedi Revan story, right? Because they were friends. Then you have moments where they're fighting together, or you have moments during the Mandalorian Wars. You have a season that starts before Mandalorian Wars. You get to know characters like Revan. You get to know Mitra. You get to know Malik or Alec at the time. You get to know these characters. Then you have their fall. You connect it to Mandalorians. It's already popular in mainstream pop culture, right? You connect it back that you could have an armor of that age, right? You can add some of these canon things we brought into Mandalorian culture and bring them into the origins of them in KOTOR. You could do stuff like that where you have the wars, you could have the fall of Revan, the rise of Malik. That could be kind of season 2. A season 3 could be the amnesia plot line. If you still wanted to go that route, or the reclamation of Revan, you can kind of condense that, and that's where you could kind of go away from the game if you didn't want to get too 1-to-1, because then you get picked apart a bit more if you do 1-to-1. So if you wanted to keep the spirit of the game without a 1-to-1 remake, you bring in the game as kind of a season 2 into season 2, season 3 type of storyline. You bring in Mitra to be a little bit more of a prevalent character towards the end of that story. Maybe make her a little bit more part of the KOTOR 1 story. And then her fall as the exile, you have that happen after. That's kind of the focus of season 2. You bring Revan a little bit more into that story. Then you'd do the same thing moving forward. You have the Revan book. If you wanted to bring that in, you could further flesh out that story. One of the reasons why I think people really don't love that story is for the way it ends, is because I think everything in that story is great up until the last few
So
chapters. It's
yeah.
the way it ends very abruptly. And then you have the second half division between Mitra and Revan. So in a TV show, you can merge those two stories a bit more. You can make it make sense. You could leave that tragedy there, right? So the MMO would be the toughest part, and that's where it would be kind of like a spin-off series, right? I think you start with all these things. You have the MMO as a spin-off, a secondary story. That's where, hypothetically 10 years down the line, you bring back the actor who played Revan for the MMO to show up in some scenes. you bring back different cameos, all that type of stuff. It could seamlessly work together to where if you had technically like a 10, 15 year long project with 2 or 3 different shows, you could ultimately have Bane. You could do Bane as a movie trilogy. I think Bane would work fine as a trilogy or duology of movies, or you could do a show and you could do kind of this I think you could bring Bane into the Sith a little bit earlier, and you could kind of have this guy who's just in the shadows. He shows up for some episodes. You don't really know who he is. Eventually, it's revealed it's Darth Bane. You do that whole thing. There's a lot of ways you can work around it. It's just you have to be open to the idea of condensing, recombining, taking elements that, like the exile that weren't thought of when they wrote the original KOTOR story, reinserting them into the KOTOR story, right? You have to, it's an exercise in combination and in addition and subtraction, right? You just really have to be open to taking things out that don't necessarily need to be there to keep the core of the story and adding things in that would have been there had they existed when the story was made. It's a tough process. It's a thankless process. It's something that people are going to be upset about until it comes out. But if they did it great, I think most people would get on board. Obviously, with anything Star Wars. If it's great, people will get on board because they're trying to please us as Star Wars fans, but they're more so trying to please the general audiences. And if you just make something good, people will watch
Yeah.
it. So that's kind of the main thing.
Yeah, and just to address like the amnesia plot, yeah, it probably doesn't happen the same way, but then you can just kind of handle it like in a very Superman actor situation, right? Like a big thing about Superman is that his Clark Kent is nothing like the very positive, very jubilant, like, just the symbol in the sky, right? Versus Clark Kent bumbling around, his shoulders and like Christopher Reeves to this day, until we see what Collinsworth does, right? Like he is still everyone's Superman because of how he could physically like morph into the character and do everything. But then we're seeing things here like with the little clips in the BTS of the new Superman, like he's got a little bit more frizzled hair, all this and that. But then when he is Superman, he's got the curl. And I'd say you have to go the same way with Revan, right? Whatever we do see, keep it fairly minimal. I still do like how comics would kind of hide his face a little bit under his cloak and all that. And then maybe you start seeing a little bit of like who he is once a little bit more, like his body and his language and how he holds himself up once he finally puts on the Mandalorian mask. But then whoever wakes up, I think one thing that people kind of forget is that when you play the game, everyone's like got like really suspicious about you, right? You just got to lean into the fact that it should be like a totally different person. Like you're portraying another character all entirely until the amnesia is like, revealed, until Malik is like, "Oh, you're Revan and all this and that," right? And then you shove them together. What who he has become after he has been reset and who he was before. Revan should be he always is supposed to be a balance of who he was before and who he remembers being, but it should be in live action who he was before and who he is now, and that's what helps him keep that balance instead of falling to the same, victimhood that he has from going into a war for being headstrong and all that. So I think it really comes down to like how you portray the character that we all start off the game as, right? I think that's way more important than the twist itself, right? Like you can, like Liam said, we're gonna have all these crisscrossing about all the different timelines, different stories. The exile should definitely be a bigger focus because she's gonna be there in the Mandalorian Wars. There's like barely any backdrop to her, any story to her that she even shows her around other than what she says in the game, right? Have her be a bigger player. Have others that we follow who then die who could have been the Revan and then it just doesn't happen. You know, there's a lot of ways to make this work here. And I think
Yeah.
once you get to the where we are at the start of KOTOR, it is just about developing this new character who isn't Revan. And then once a couple of things start getting teased or like, oh, that's a little off. That's how you build it up. And frankly, at the end of the day, maybe that's not enough. But then, like you were talking about, like the KOTOR 3 instead of the MMO, I agree. And that's kind of where that twist would happen. You expect what's next for Revan, he'll disappear from the story. But what if he doesn't? Right? What if he's in exile, like it was originally planned, kind of work hand in hand? Things can happen afterwards that then branch off into these spin-offs or whatever, but that's what even if you don't love the show whenever it comes out and all that, you're still kinda curious, like, what would a potential KOTOR 3 look like? What storylines did they bring in with the original KOTOR writers as consultants and all that, and, like, where they wanted to go, right? How are you gonna combine what Obsidian did, what BioWare did, into that hypothetical 3, right? Like, what would the writers for both have done, right? So I think that's where the bigger twist happens, the unknown for everybody, to have him go off and then be like, "No, he comes back," right? And then maybe he comes back and then he goes crazy and then the darkness is revealed. He's still normal for so long, right? Like, there's so many ways that you can add twists and turns and surprises. The amnesia plot, yeah, maybe it's not gonna be super surprising, but there's plenty of Star Wars fans who've joined up in 2015 and all that, who don't know anything about KOTOR, who will watch that and will see the portrayal, whatever changes they make, and will be surprised, and we have to give them the priority. Like, w we play games, we've seen it in our little 14-inch screens when it was back in PCs with a huge back at the behind their monitor, right? Like, that is 20 something years ago, guys. We cannot assume that everybody knows about games, as legendary as they are, and the twist that came with them. So, if the general audience is sold on that, good enough. Then you can treat fans who have been playing the games, who have kept up with the EU and everything, with the twist that can come with like, "Oh, this is kinda where KOTOR 3 would have gone instead of Star Wars: The Old Republic MMO."
And I think the amnesia thing is, I mean, even though it is the big twist of the first game, right? If you were creating your own KOTOR world, it, I hate to say it, but it really would be kind of a secondary thing to retelling this story if
Yeah.
you told the first part correctly. But it depends where you want to start it. If you wanted to start it at KOTOR 1, right, you could do amnesia without anybody knowing, and you could do flashbacks, or you could even do a season with Amnesia Revan. It ends with kind of the reveal that he is
Yeah.
dark side Revan, and then you do a second season that's all Mandalorian Wars, and it's everything that led up to it and his fall, and then betrayal by Malik. You could do that kind of in between story, and then a third season you go back to present day, and then do a season where you wrap it up and he beats Malik. So there are workarounds. There are plenty of ways we can do it. But yeah, I do think in an ideal world, that's the version I would go for sure. Like Critical Thinker said, a Game of Thrones esque Star Wars show would be incredibly badass. I don't trust current Disney Plus to pull it off, as you say. But man, if they were better at making shows, and I agree, this is all hypotheticals. I mean, until they show us that they can make a show of that quality or close to that quality, or even if they just made a consistent like 4 straight good shows, I'm not going to really have faith in them doing it. So this is all like my hypothetical dream project. If I was working on it, if I was the writer, if I was the producer type of
Yeah.
thing, right? Like that's what I'm pitching kind of. If Lucasfilm, you're listening, I'm available. Um, but
Yeah, me too.
yeah, this is all hypothetical. And so I don't really trust them to do it. I really don't trust anybody to do it besides what I have in my head. I just, and I'm going to be skeptical too until I see it if they do one without me. But yeah, I think we can. It's still fun to speculate and see what could be coming. Chris says, I do remember reading the back of the box of KOTOR at like 6 years old, and it's saying 4,000 years before A New Hope, and thinking that didn't make any sense due to the technology. Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah.
It's just
And 2
prequel
is
tech.
egregious.
Yeah, it's all just prequel tech with the 4,000 year gap. So apparently
Sick.
they're like all of the Einsteins who created all the different tech, they just all died, and now you're just left with like 3,000 years of not very smart people, and then eventually you get a little bit of a tech boost. Yeah, it doesn't make much sense. And then Chris says, "I'm hoping for Dawn of the Jedi to have the same aesthetic of Tales of the Jedi and technology instead of the semi-primitive that the comics went for." I agree. Like I think Tales of the Jedi could be a nice in between, right? If you did Dawn of the Jedi, let's say 5 to 10,000 years before KOTOR instead of 20,000 years before KOTOR, you could have Tales of the Jedi be the middle ground. I really, like I said before, I do not want to see caveman Jedi, but I feel like they're going to go that direction, and I'm afraid of that. But I think if they did go that direction, and still not saying it can't be good, I'm open to anything. It's not what I would do, but I'm open to anything. Um, if they went that direction, Tales of the Jedi would be a good middle ground place. I just want to see how they incorporate the tech and the evolving. I mean, it's not just like lightsabers and that type of technology. It's the spaceships. It's traveling. When we now have in High Republic, let's throw in a wrench and things in canon, is that hyperspace that to the hyperspace lanes to the outer rim are more recently charted to the prequels than they were. They were charted in KOTOR 4,000 years before, so it changed a lot. And so it'll be interesting to see what they do there. Critical Thinker says, I just wish Disney had let the EU keep going using separate timelines for the main canon. I mean, Star Trek does this. Why can't Star Wars do it? I agree with you. I think they could have. It always made sense why not to make a movie based on the EU, because you would have needed people to have read a bunch of stuff in order to make that movie. Um, but it didn't make sense necessarily to wipe it completely. And I think now, getting towards the 10-year, or we're past the 10-year anniversary of canon starting, I think it would make sense to restart the EU, even if it was just in print only, or in games. And we'll see what they do. But yeah, we've talked about KOTOR a lot. I think we should get to another question, or let's run down some quick hits real quick, because there's a couple other things I want to mention for the stories, and then we'll come back here real quick. And I'll just run down all these stories, and then I'll let you talk about the ones that stood out to you most, Sanak. So we have the Watto controversy, first of all. The Charles Soule new comic book, Legacy of Vader, about Darth Vader and Kylo Ren, and mostly following Kylo Ren between Last Jedi and Rise of Skywalker, with some flashbacks and Darth Vader, and some paralleling between their stories. And one of the things that we have seen recently was the artist who drew some of the pages of the Legacy of Vader comic released one image that shows Vader killing Watto, and that got the internet in an uproar. Some people love it because obviously Watto was the slaver of Anakin Skywalker. So some people love it, some people don't like it. Personally, I think it kind of makes sense, even though Vader does not like sand and he'd be going back to Tatooine, assumedly, to kill Watto. But I think it makes some sense. But we also know that this is completely taken out of context. Charles Soule's already commented on it, like, wait until you read it to make any judgment unless I post something, you know, take it with a grain of salt. Um, so he's already commented on it, but it's a really cool panel nonetheless. And we also know from a lot of the stuff Charles Soule has done with the Vader flashbacks, with some of the Greg Pak stuff, with the Vader internal thoughts. A lot of the stuff we see in these comics around Vader is fictional. It's made up. It's in Vader's head. And what makes it even more so probably fictional is this is all coming from Kylo Ren's perspective. If you read the actual blurbs on there, it's saying Vader must have returned here and taken his revenge. It doesn't say he actually did. So it's still up in the air. We'll read the comic and we'll find out. But yeah, that's for those of you who might have heard about this Watto controversy. Um, that is the controversy. It's kind of a dumb one, to be honest. We'll see when it comes out. We also have the numbers for the Acolyte. There are some people who are, some Acolyte defenders out there who are coming in being like, the Acolyte, not as bad performing as a lot of people thought. It's the second most watched show of 2024 for Disney Plus. And while that is more of an achievement than you would think, because I did not think it would be second on Disney Plus, there are some stipulations to that. First of all, the Acolyte's total gross in terms of minutes in the year, or at least the half year, 7 months or so that it was out, that in 2024, are similar to what Ahsoka's was. And Ahsoka was considered a poorly performing show. That's similar to what Ahsoka's amount of minutes were during its 8-episode run. So that shows you that not just Acolyte performed very poorly when compared to other Star Wars shows, but it also performed. Disney Plus, just in general, had a really, really bad year. And I think that's been a controversy. Some people using it to bolster their bring back the Acolyte comments, saying it was canceled too soon. Other people using it to say, well, look at Disney Plus is a failing service, Star Wars is falling apart, all of that. So you can kind of pick your side. Acolyte did not perform well. If you look at the metrics, even if being the second, excuse me, highest performing series, it did not perform well. So I think that's pretty factual. The other side is if you're looking at just purely Disney Plus metrics, it is a higher performing show than Bad Batch or even Agatha All Along, which was a new Marvel show this year, Echo. And Agatha, I think, is a better direct comparison because Agatha had similar amount of episodes, similar run times, and came out in a similar time of the year. Although Agatha is slightly behind Acolyte and did come out over 3 months after. So that's a little bit of a boost for Agatha's performance as well. But yeah, so there's that one. We also had last week, I wanted to bring this up. We did have Jod's Jedi Master, who was supposed to be in Skeleton Crew, played by an actress named Yasmin Al Masri, who shared her picture on social media that she was supposed to play Jod's Jedi Master. It was a scene that was cut from the show. Kind of a scene. I'm not sure if it's a scene that I cared too much about seeing, but it would have been cool to see it, I guess, maybe in a distance. But I think the explanation, since she's not anybody important, right? Since it would be a new character, I think just the explanation we got on the show was fine. But we did have a Jedi Master for Jod originally there. We have Bit Reactor's new Star Wars strategy game is supposedly supposed to be unveiled at Star Wars Celebration. I think that's going to be pretty cool. I cannot wait for another Star Wars strategy game, and I'm very much so looking forward to that. We also have Sigourney Weaver talking about her role in The Mandalorian and Grogu, and it apparently is a small role, which is definitely different than what a lot of us have speculated, that she was going to be playing one of the big bads or one of the big Imperials in the show. She still could be one of the big Imperials if we are going more of the underworld route with Rhoda the Hutt and Embo and all these characters and more of the crime world of the Mandalorian. So she could be the biggest Imperial, but now we are having to wait and see how big her role is. And then finally, one we did talk about briefly on a Skeleton Crew conversation on a Skeleton Crew Live, but wanted to bring it up again because we didn't get to talk about it last week. And that was that Rory McCann has been cast to play Baylan Skoll in Ahsoka Season 2, officially replacing Ray Stevenson. We talked about it before. I thought it was a great casting. Somebody who's not incredibly recognizable at first, especially because his character in Game of Thrones has a big scar. So I think it won't be perfect 1-to-1, but physically, absolutely perfect for the role. And I think that's such a big part of Baylan Skoll. So I love the casting. So, Sanak, out of those little quick hit stories, which one stood out to you the most?
Oh boy, that's a lot of news. It's been nice to get a little bit of an uptick recently, but yeah, I mean, I think I've already made my thoughts clear on Rory. I think that's still the most momentous pick that they could have made, and with time, it just gets better for me. The Watto one is a controversy in the sense that it's escaped Star Wars fandom and it just exploded on other fandoms throughout Twitter and all that. And it's like so many memes about think about the homie Watto drinks out for Watto. Like it's like, all right, like we're all. I mean, and I think that kind of comes down to the point that for most people, it's hilarious. For, like, the people who are, like, reading, they're like, "Ugh, Vader again on Tatooine, and he's killed Watto, like, why would he do that?" And I mean, I just tweeted it out, I'm like, "Oh, no, everyone's favorite slaver is killed." Like, "Okay, like, you guys care about Watto that much?" Like, he's clearly life hasn't treated him well by Attack of the Clones anyway, so you why do you think his former slave, once he's gone, like, fully mad and full of anguish and become a robot would be like, "Oh, yeah, you know, Watto, Imma leave that guy alone any if I'm on Tatooine." No, if anything, I wouldn't be surprised if they, like, kinda connected to the 2015 run when he does first show up on Tatooine again for presumably the first time, and, once he kills all the sand people there, he's like, "You know who I didn't kill? Watto," right? Like, it could just be connected like that. Another way of looking at it is that, especially in Soul's run, especially in Pack's run, anytime a panel is in red, it doesn't necessarily mean it's real. It could just be thoughts, it could be just memories, right? And it could be amalgamation of both. So it could just be like a manifestation of what he wanted to do, but like why draw attention to himself or something? We don't know, right? And the fact that this is a Legacy of Vader series and it's dealing with a character who presumes a lot about his grandfather once he finds out that he was Darth Vader and kind of creates this image of him and who he is and not the Anakin Skywalker that he's probably been raised on a little bit, right? Like, yeah, I mean, how much of that is also Kylo, right? I think that's why we have to, consider it, right? Like, okay, like, let's hold off, like, this could just be a panel of, like, feeling, like, what he thinks that is happening here and, like moments and images of pain that Vader left behind are planted on Tatooine to keep himself away or something. Like, there's so many ways to look at it. So, it's never really a controversy. It's just that Star Wars fans are, for some reason, obsessed with Watto. I'm like, "Yeah, he's a pretty interesting design, but he's also a bit of a racist caricature in a lot of ways." And like, again, at the end of the day, his biggest role is to be Anakin's slave master that he gambles away, right? Like, that's all you really need to remember from him, so why wouldn't Vader take any pleasure in killing even more of his past, right? So that's how I look at that. Acolyte numbers, I agree. I was posting a little bit about this on our Twitter too. And it kinda leads down to the whole path of, like, Disney Plus hasn't had, like, strings of their shows and their franchises being hits. It's been a little bit worse in some ways with the MCU, with how, like, unnecessary some of the shows have felt. I think, like, when both Star Wars and MCU started, MCU was a little bit rockier, but for the most part,
Mhm.
from Endgame kinda covered up for some flaws with, like, stuff like Falcon and the Winter Soldier, and then WandaVision was still a great success for them, right? I think that first 2 years of Disney Plus worked out for them great, because it was also in a time period where everyone's at home, we're watching, like, people don't talk about something like Soul from Pixar because it never got a theatrical release, right? But if you were there at that time, it was, like, the most talked about thing because we were all watching it on Disney Plus on streaming, right? So, our behavior was temporary, we all kinda assumed the uptick of it would only kinda come down a little bit, but it's come down a lot, right? A lot of things in life, people wanna be back in theaters, mid-budgets have kinda become a little bit more successful again, overblown budgets aren't working, franchises are just not being looked the same, right? And it's up and down, right? So, I think all of that contributes to why Acolyte does fairly well because this is the last year or so has been probably the weakest that we've seen, from Star Wars in the MCU and all of the other franchises, right? Like, I think it was just last year, Willow was removed from Disney Plus too,
Mhm.
the TV show Willow. So it's not like they've been truly kingmakers since, like, 2021, you could say. So it's been a rough go, and I think it's just everything's kinda coming down. So, yeah, you can defend Acolyte. I know Rebecca Henderson and everyone is like, "Yo, like, this is a reason why I shouldn't have," like, they've been posting about but there's another wrinkle there because Luminate and Nielsen are telling kinda different stories, right? If you look at Nielsen, they're saying it's the worst performing. Look at Luminate, they're, like, saying it's better. Both of them are estimates. The only people who know are Disney, and Disney made the decision, and I think with the factoring how much marketing went, I think that they're like, "We put so much in the marketing for this," and once it dipped out for 2, 3 weeks and then kinda came back and then dipped again, and that super low finale by live action standards, it's like, ugh. And just a year before, you're looking at Ahsoka, a week show that took about 2 months to even get a season 2 announcement, and it was still much, much higher, right? Is that saying that we should stick with established characters all the time? No, we shouldn't. That limits the scope of Star Wars. That is where some of the bigger wrinkles of the Mandoverse are currently. But that being said, like, it just didn't do well. It really didn't do well. If and I've been saying this, if it had the budget lowered and longer episodes, I think no matter what, both Liam and I, even if Liam didn't love it, I think we would have been like, "Yeah, we're gonna get a season 2 and finish it off, and hopefully it's stronger and better." And then you work around it. You have auxiliary material, you have High Republic books, you have stronger prequel trilogy connections. You could set up a Plagueis trilogy. As it is now, if anything, the Plagueis trilogy or show or whatever comes out next has a lot more onus on it to make it work really well and definitely placate the fans of that very, very late EU novel that is super good, and then deal with some connections to the PT, and then deal with some of the remnants of the show, right? The Chimera stuff, super fascinating to me still as a characterization, but there's just not enough time for him, and when he does shine, it is with Osha, but Osha doesn't have anything to make her swayed entirely to a little bit more of his viewpoint because frankly, we don't see anything with the ensemble scenes that is enough for her with her individual relationships with a Jecki or a Yord or Soul. It's very small scenes. So longer show, lower budget, less marketing. I think it gets a season 2 to conclude it. Even if Manny Jacinto is like, we were thinking about 3 seasons and a movie. The movie part to me, to this day, even if it was a huge success, super unrealistic because Amando couldn't pull that off, and the movie only is coming because they can't, in their mind, justify a season 4. So why would this show be suddenly elevated up to, okay, we got 3 great seasons, even if it's a flagship show, is it gonna really break into the stratosphere the same way and get a movie out of it, like a sequel movie out of it? No. If it gets a movie, it's tangentially connected to it. So, I feel like there's just a lot of optimism and idealism that unfortunately feels a bit misplaced with just the final product, which, again, there were rumors when it was being filmed that it was a bit of a difficult shoot because everything was on location, things were being changed. At the end of the day, this was not the Sith Acolyte story announced in the 2020 slate. It ended up being very different, and it's a little sad to say, but it became a better show because they expanded Manny's role with Chimera when he wasn't supposed to be a big character till, like, a potential season 2, so, yeah, I mean, look, I still like a lot of the show. It's still, like, a very, very low C minus for me, and if we're going through an A through F tier, but I can't defend the idea that this is a show that was a huge success because it just shows that, like, everything with Disney, with its franchises, has been going down, and then a show with a much, much lower budget in Agatha, which everyone thought, "Why was this even made? Who cares about Agatha? She's like a C or D tier character at best that people remember because of Catherine Hahn more than anything." That turned out to be a pretty amazing success for them, and it came out, like you said, 3, 4 months later. It's just it's not, you can't really say that this is a smash success. You can say that you want Star Wars to not end its shows early, cancel them early, and I agree because that is not something George Lucas would have done. If anything, he would have doubled down, made an extra season or something, right? And I'll always miss that about George Lucas being in charge of Star Wars. People complain about all that stuff too back then, so it was always gonna be a lose-lose, and Disney at the end of the day is gonna be a lot more fiscally minded than a George Lucas would have been.
Well, all those are good points, and yeah, I think the acolyte controversy is going to be there forever, just as anything that is mixed reception on Star Wars or anything that is negatively received by the majority and has some defenders. There'll always be some controversy around it, but yeah, I think these numbers, while could be skewed positive, are just very very negative in general around the entire platform. Like X-Men 97 being only a thousand million minutes billion minutes behind the Acolyte and being like a 25-minute episode cartoon show, like that goes to show you what's kind of the state of Disney Plus. I was a little disappointed with the Bad Batch that it didn't get a little closer to 97, but those are also 20-minute episodes as well. But that show ended. So, all right, back to the chat here, and we're going to get through your guys' questions. It's going to be the focus of the last bit of our show here. And getting back to the chat, we got Critical Thinker who says, which EU Jedi besides Mara Jade, since Zahn said they unfortunately don't want her back, which I think is ridiculous, would you want to see brought back in Luke's new Jedi Order whenever they get around to doing that? Well, there's so many good ones to choose from the New Republic era, New Jedi Order era of Jedi, but I think one of the obvious ones right off the bat is Corran Horn, who is already kind of back in the Obi-Wan show very briefly. Corran Horn being one of the biggest characters of the New Republic era. I would love to see him be a part of the New Republic era, lead into the Jedi Order of Luke's, and he could be even somebody who somehow survived and comes back for Rey's new Jedi Order because his age, he would still be of an age to where he could be an older, kind of custodian of the Jedi ways, of Luke's Jedi ways in the next one. So I think that would be one of the top ones for me. I don't really want Kip Duran back, but I kind of like some of the things he brought to the new Jedi Order series. Like, I think it's interesting to have in an era where the Jedi are completely destroyed, and then you have a bunch of Force sensitives who Luke is recruiting of all different ages just because he's desperate to build a new order. I think it's interesting to have one who's kind of develops his own cult following and just is his own wild card. Now, I think Luke and Cannon would handle him a bit more strictly or just kind of completely disassociate with him altogether. By the time he was an adult, like I don't really want young Kip Duron. I want adult New Jedi Order Kip Duron. But I think it would be interesting to have a Jedi Order that, if it's being rebuilt by one person, yes, he might be connected to the Yodas and the Obi-Wans, the lineage of old, but do his teachings create all these different factions within the New Jedi Order? I think that's one of the things I've always found interesting about New Jedi Order storytelling and the way the Praxium works and all that, and Luke's philosophy. So some character in that Kip type of New Jedi Order role, I think would be pretty cool. But the rest of them are so kind of, to me, predicated on a lot of the stories from the EU, right? Like, do those Jedi work in canon? I think Corran does, no matter what, right? But some of the best Jedi from the EU, Jason, Jaina, Anakin, obviously, they're not going to work in today's EU. If you don't have Jason, do you want to do somebody like Tanel Ka? I don't know if that necessarily works. If you don't do them, do you have Lobaka? Probably not. If you don't do the actual story of the new Jedi Order, do you do Ganner? Probably not. So, to me, a lot of the best characters of that time period are difficult to bring back in a way that's meaningful to the spirit of that character. Like I said, when you're adapting, it's not just about putting X character in something. You have to really keep the spirit of who they were and what they did. So if you're not able to keep the spirit of Ganner by not telling that same story, I don't really need to see Ganner back. I can have a different Jedi with a new story, right? So for me, yeah, I think easily Corran Horn would be my top.
Yeah, it's a tough one. Again, I'm also a fan of Mara coming back. There's plenty of time for her to be in the story, so why not make it happen? And you can still keep much of the spirit and some of the tragedy of that and how that influences Luke. You know, you can say, "Oh, you're fridging the character and all that," but I think Azan would handle her death if it has to happen a little bit more maturely as a consultant than kind of what happened with everything in Legacy of the Force, where he was not made aware of that happening to his character, right? So I think that would be a better ending for her, regardless, even if it still has to end in tragedy. As far as a Jedi who I'd expect to see, I mean, Liam already said one of my top picks. Obviously, it's going to be Corrin. But, it brings into question, like, how is Luke in canon handling it? Like, is his first generation of Jedi very similar to the Jedi Academy trilogy where anybody and everybody's got the Force? And then is his second generation very much like the Jaina, Jason, Anakin triumvirate where it's like, "Let's go with younglings now. Let's build it out the foundations instead of just kids," right? Like, so are they gonna parallel that? Are they never gonna do that? Right? Like, that is kinda where the question is. Uh, I would still like stragglers that are older, but I do
Mhm.
suspect that maybe it becomes Order 66 more and like prequel Jedi, prequel Boken Jedi, right? Who have an influence or kind of are like, we're not going to be in an order with you, but we'll be like visiting professors kind of. So it's very curious how they're going to handle Luke and interacting with other Jedi there before him and after him who are relatively close to his age or older. I would again still like Corn, but I would like if they're gonna bring any EU characters, bring in the ones that never got their due. Like I think Star Wars Centralized on Twitter, he put out like, oh, when the Gossip news came out, like, is this our Camp Solusar casting right now? Just kind of like a half-hearted joke, but no, honestly, why not? Right? Like he's a character who was supposed to be so much bigger. I think if you guys have seen the bookshelf update from Liam, like he got a copy through me of Lightsider, so that's where he would have become, like, a fully fledged character before his introduction in Dark Empire 2, and then if that came out and then Dark Empire 2, maybe he would become, like, way more important to where things are going in New Jedi Order instead of just kind of dealing with, like, protecting the kids and hiding them away and all that, right? He becomes very much a background Jedi when he could have been someone a lot more, arguably, especially with some of his origins being pretty similar of a start, to, like, all these other Jedis that have lineages spanning from the then prequels, right? So I would like characters like that that can kind of come in. If you bring in a Gantoris and almost make it like a what if he survived, right? I would love to see that because I think a Gantoris has a lot of the qualities of Kip Duron without some of the extreme results of Kip Duron, and you could see some very interesting maturity and choices that he would make, not just with the Jedi, but like with politics. Like, still to this day, one of my favorite scenes is when he meets Mon Mothma the first time, with Luke in his presence, and like he's like, Luke is like, "Oh my god," and or Leia's like, "They look like they're meeting equals," right? Like it's a very interesting thing to have someone that you kind of have to train to build up an order, but also know that they've been a leader of their own civilization. They have done everything that to bring them out away from protecting the few survivors of their civilization. You have to prove that you can elevate them further, and what happens once you do that, right? And I think that's kinda where if they kinda combine him with a Kip Durron, you could see a really fascinating character come out of it. So, that's how I would address it, right? Kinda dealing with the consequences of the Empire, of the Jedi, and what that means once Luke kinda gets his hands on them and kinda pushes all their power levels up or their training up, and what does that mean for the rest of the story, for his Jedi Order and everything. So, that's how I would look at it. Mara for sure, Corrin for sure, unappreciated Jedi, and then Jedi that can kinda be combined, and with that combination of the different characters would actually have some very interesting things to say because of the legacy of the Empire, because of the legacy of the prequel Jedi.
Yeah, and another one for me too that I forgot earlier, and I knew I was forgetting somebody and couldn't think of it, is Kyle, Kyle Katarn, who's not necessarily one of like the member. I don't necessarily, kind of like Corrin, you don't necessarily associate him with Luke's order as much because they are
Yeah.
kind of their own people. But Kyle is another one I think would work just because, yeah, you would have to change one of the big pieces of his story just to bring Kyle back, right? He's not the guy who stole the Death Star plans anymore. But as a Jedi, as a mercenary Jedi, I think that type of stuff you could bring back in an interesting way. Not as seamless as Corrin, but somebody who could be pretty cool, at least personality wise, with Luke's
Yeah.
order. Critical Thinker says Corrin and Jaina would be my top picks, but let's be real, Jaina's never coming back. So I guess Kip, Saba, and then a lesser known pick, seeing Kirana T back would be cool. She never really got much to do, even back in the EU, and tying her in with new characters like Marin could be cool. And then said, "See, yeah, that's the problem. Without Jason, Jane, and Anakin, characters like Tanel Kaz, Zek Tahiri, and Loey would be significantly less exciting to bring in. Plus, Luke's order in canon starts way later, since in Rise of Kylo Ren, Luke says he's the last of the Jedi when Ben's already a teenager. And yeah, and we see in, well, the Mandalorian timeline actually still matches up with
Yeah, no, it still
the
matches up, yeah.
original Legends timeline, but we see that he actually is starting to build his order a little earlier in canon than he is in Legends. But the problem is the way Rise of Kylo Ren infers it is that he goes with children again. He's trying to do what the original order did, and he's taking young Force sensitives, not older Force sensitives. So he is with Grogu beginning earlier because he doesn't begin until 10 ABY technically in Legends, and in canon, if Book of Boba Fett's happening at the same time as Mandalorian season 1, which again we need times for all that stuff. We need to know what the actual dates are. But if they're happening in the same year, that's 9 ABY, which is the same year as the Thrawn trilogy in Legends. So it is a similar timeline, if not earlier than he does in Legends. But if he only is taking younglings, then then that's where you have the big problem. If he takes some adults or he takes some teenagers like a Kip, he could we could have something similar because technically his order doesn't fall until after New Jedi Order is already done in Legends. So it is a similar timeline. It is just a matter of what direction they want to go. And I think since the Rise of Kylo Ren really only shows like one real image of his order, and it's just a bunch of kids, you can just say all the adults were somewhere else, right? You can
Right,
retcon
yeah,
that
that's
easy.
that's not a limitation.
So, but yeah, thanks for the question. It's definitely something I hope they address soon. Anthony Tiff says, "Do you guys think that when Sidious had lightning redirected into his face in Revenge of the Sith, that revealed his true appearance, as the novelization of Revenge of the Sith seems to imply?" I've never really bought that theory personally. With the novelization, there are a lot of things inferred in the novelization that are kind of well, Stover, using the script and playing with it, right? When he wrote the novelization, he hadn't seen the movie. So he hadn't really seen what it was going to look like. So I think what you see in the movie, I would take, even if you're doing the Legends tiering system, right? Anything you see in a movie takes precedent over anything you read in a book, even if it's the same exact scene. So I still firmly believe that I think his face is at least mostly deformed by the lightning being redirected back in his face. Now that goes to the age-old question of why can he not turn off his lightning when it's hurting him? Because that happens so many times, and the Rise of Skywalker just made that even worse. But yeah, I think it's mostly cosmetically done by the lightning, but I would buy that maybe he had some physical deformities he was covering up. I just don't think it was that bad.
Yeah, I agree. I think no matter how steeped you are into the dark side, you're gonna have like dark eyelids and you're gonna have some sort of I mean, it's a cancer. I think even when Lucas wrote it, it was still like a cancer. It's supposed to wear away at you. It's supposed to eat you inside out. It's just a matter of like how much you can tolerate in the quest for power and how immediately you want to have it. So, like Liam said, I think there's a little bit to that. I just don't think that it's like, oh, this is always what he was wearing. Because
Yeah.
then maybe questions can come up with like, hey, is he a lot older than we even think in the Plagueis novel? Is that just what he settles on? Like, I don't know. Like, I always found that to be like it's redirected. I don't. I'm not the biggest fan of Mace Windu, but I want to give him credit. Like he did redirect it back, and for some reason he was able to force this guy to keep shooting lightning at him, and his defenses stayed strong. Right. So yeah, I will say no, I don't think so. I think that's just where Stover has fun with it, and you read it and it works because it's the novel. But then you take a step back and you're like, there are just some things that were just definitely like invention.
Anthony also says, "Do you guys believe that it's possible that in Legends there were multiple chosen ones, as there are characters such as Ulic Qel-Droma, Revan, Satele Shan, and even Cade Skywalker who destroyed the Sith?" It's an interesting theory. I think, as we've talked a lot about in the past with Chosen One prophecy, um, it's more so, I think, directly involved with the Jedi versus Sith conflict and less about the offshoots, right? Like Cade, he destroys the one Sith. It's different, even if it's the same in terms of name. It's different. I think what Lucas intended, and you have to again take the EU with a grain of salt because Lucas never really paid attention to the EU unless it randomly came up like, hey, we can put this character in the movie in the background, like Ayla or somebody. He didn't really pay attention to the EU, so that's where you're going to have conflicting ideas about the Chosen One prophecy. But if you're looking just at the movies, I think Lucas fully intended for the Sith to be gone forever after episode 6. Like, I do, no matter what was written in Dark Empire, no matter what happened in all these other things that came out after, I think he meant for the Sith to fully be destroyed. And if you look at what Ulic, Revan, Satele, all of them do, the Sith aren't destroyed. They just win their day and then they come back in a new form. So I don't necessarily buy that there's more than one chosen one, but as I've said in the past, you can have different people who are different Anakin Skywalker-esque people at the time, right? Like they're the chosen one of their day in terms of they're the hero of their day. It doesn't necessarily have to be somebody who destroyed the Sith forever. And you can have false chosen one prophecies, right? Like maybe Anakin is the chosen one, but this chosen one prophecy has existed for 20,000 years. They think Revan is the chosen one, but oh no, the Sith are back, right? As long as it's not George Lucas canon, as long as it's not directly contradicting something George Lucas said, then I think it's possible to have that chosen one prophecy brought back into the stories of these other characters, but they wouldn't necessarily be the chosen one unless Lucas directly said it.
It's chosen one prophecy. That's one that over time I have become, especially after reading like uh, Master and Apprentice. and a little bit more diving into the headspace of canon Qui-Gon, I have become a little bit more convinced that it just ended up becoming like a self-fulfilling prophecy because Qui-Gon believed in it so much and then people took advantage of that. Because I don't think there are multiple chosen ones or like multiple people can be chosen ones. I just think that the Force usually empowers or places the individuals who are capable of fighting off the evil, rising to meet the darkness, right? And they are the heroes of their time, right? Like, I would not consider Ulick in my mind, as much as I love him and as much of basically a Tales of the Jedi, Old Republic Anakin that he is, I wouldn't consider him a chosen one, right? I would just say that everyone in that era, there's a chance if you're gonna kind of go with like Tolkien's kind of way of like saying like the past, everything is bigger, stronger, more alive, and then over time it decays. If you want to go with that, then you could say maybe the Old Republic era, just everyone's power, everyone's connection to the Force was stronger than it was by the time of the prequels. I think there's some reads to that are available, especially with some of the discussions Mace and Yoda have about their diminished control and understanding and presence in the Force, right? How clouded they are there. So you could say that maybe that in general they were all much stronger, and so was the dark side, and so was the light side. I would say that's fair, and that they were heroes of their time that met the challenges. But I wouldn't say chosen ones. I just think that like once Plagueis started experimenting, got fairly close to the idea of like he's not that far away from creating life. The Force was like, okay, we have to push like our the most that we've ever done, and like now immaculately conceive through the Force this child that will become the most powerful because that's just how close it's gone to like the balance being totally upset. Then Qui-Gon reads this prophecy that kind of just refers to heroes coming up at every different point in time, presumes that it is about Anakin, and then he's not there to actually herald him into the direction that he could have possibly put him on track for. Qui-Gon's death, Obi-Wan's inexperience, the Jedi's dogmatism, and then obviously Anakin kind of falling under Palpatine's guise basically for the next 10, 15 years of his life, puts him on track to be super powerful and all this and that, but not the guy uh, meeting to become like the chosen one in any single way. I just think that it was just okay. Palpatine sees that here, maybe hears some rumblings about what the Jedi are looking into, and he's like, "Yeah, what if I make this kid into that level of power, and presumably with that level of power, he's gonna be the chosen one for in most people's minds, but I'm quietly manipulating him to under just, like, cave in everything to do with that prophecy." So that's how I look at it. I still think it is kinda misread at the end of the day. It's just that Qui-Gon believed in it so much that the Jedi kinda had to follow through with it, and that just left openings, and then once Anakin turns to the dark side and all that, finally, like, okay, you can say things are kinda balanced out once Luke comes in and reminds the original intent of what this could have been, to just be a hero of your time that the Force conceived you as, right? That's the max that I look at it as. I don't look as anyone other than Anakin as being a chosen one. I think Anakin is still the chosen one, but chosen one to me has just more like the Force is just super afraid of Plagueis kind of upsetting the scales forever, as opposed to, oh, this is the person one who will defeat the Sith forever. It's like, I think that was always misread because if you couldn't hold on to the idea of Sidious being defeated in 1983 and by 91 he was already kind of back, why would we say that the Sith are just forever done, right? Maybe in the movies, but eh, Chosen One thing throws such a wrench that everyone's retroactively won. It's a weird thing. I just think the best way to look at it is that it's the Force reacting super heavily in that moment, and then Qui-Gon's misread of sorts kind of becomes ultimately what happens with everyone kind of pulling at Anakin.
Well, we're almost done with our show. We're going to wrap up here in the next 15 minutes or so, 15, 20 minutes. I want to make sure we get to a lot of the people's comments that did send them in fairly early because that was our intention tonight. So we're going to get to Kylie and Brandon. We're going to get to everybody's comments as much as we can. But again, if you want to make sure you get a comment on tonight's stream, send in a super chat. We greatly appreciate the support and it will bump it up to the top. Again, if you're a Patreon member as well, check your tier. You at a certain tier, you can send in your chat. And if you are a YouTube membership, member at that same tier, you can send in a chat and we prioritize yours as well. All right, back to the chats here. And Kylie Stewart said, "What's the difference between Star Wars canon and Star Wars Legends for books, movies, TV shows, etc.?" Well, that's something that could be a really long explanation, and I do kind of just to plug another video. I made a video in August called "How to Watch All Star Wars Movies and TV." And in that video, as well as in a video that I made of like every Star Wars release ever, if you go to the 2012, or I think no, 2014 to 2016 video, there's explanations that are going to be longer for that as well, if you want a more in-depth thing. But if you want the brief one, it's basically that when Disney bought Star Wars in 2012, they eventually decided that the 30 plus years of material we had prior in books, video games, comic books, TV was so dense and sometimes contradicted itself. And they were worried that the movies and shows they were going to make, because now they were going, Star Wars before then was just anything movies or TV that was made was something George Lucas was directly involved in. And because he's just one guy, and it was a self-funded studio, completely privately owned company. It wasn't a public company. He did everything on his own. And it was all coming out of his pocket. You got less Star Wars movies and TV because it was all going through him. When Disney bought it, obviously much bigger company, publicly traded company, their goal is making movies and TV. They were like, we're going to make a bunch of stuff and we don't want to have to worry about contradicting 30 plus years of material. So we're going to designate all of that. In 2014, they decided we're going to designate everything that came out before 2014 as Star Wars Legends. And that's a separate timeline. That's everything that existed before, including the original 6 movies, including the Clone Wars shows, both of them. And yes, even though some people don't like to admit it, the 3D animated Clone Wars is technically Legends all the way through season 6. And that all became Legends. Then for canon, they cherry picked some things that they thought would work well with canon. Since their Star Wars Rebels show coming out, directly connected to Clone Wars became canon, the 3D animated show. Then they made a season 7 that's only canon, right? They also picked the 6 movies because that's the foundational piece of Star Wars. All 6 movies, all the George Lucas stuff, pulled it over, but they didn't pull over the 2D animated Clone Wars show. That stayed Legends. All the other books, everything stayed Legends. There's only one comic book that is both Legends and canon, and that was Darth Maul, Son of Dathomir, because it directly ties into the Clone Wars. So other than that, those were the only things brought over. Then everything released 2014 on. So all the sequels, all the Disney Plus shows, all the comics, books, video games we've gotten since 2014, all of them are considered canon, and they're part of the current timeline that they're making stuff for. Legends is technically a dead timeline. They're not making any more content for it. Only the Old Republic MMO RPG is the only thing that's coming out for Legends. But it is a separate timeline. So you can read it and enjoy it as its own timeline, but it is not connected to currently what's coming out in the Disney Plus shows. So hopefully that kind of clarified everything for you. Again, if you want a further explanation, you can check out some of those videos. But yeah, let's get the Brandon Trans question here. It says, first question for tonight, which 2025 superhero movie are you guys most likely interested to see? Captain America 4, Brave New World, or James Gunn's Superman based off trailers and marketing? For me, it's by far Superman. I'm just a huge DC guy. So anything DC, especially with trying to reboot the DCU, trying to finally make it good, it's Superman by a mile. Like, Superman is my most anticipated movie of the year. I'm very excited for it. Not even really because it's James Gunn, but just purely because I'm just hoping this DC universe gets off the ground. But I think it looks really good so far. I've been impressed by the marketing, or at least not let down by the marketing. I thought it looks fine. I'm can't wait to see it. I've watched the trailer a million times, and that's not to disparage Brave New World. I'm hesitant about it just purely because MCU has mostly let us down lately with films. The only one being out last year was Deadpool 3. Deadpool and Wolverine was good, but it wasn't, I didn't think, exceptional, and it also wasn't really that MCU. It was its own thing. It was more Fox. It was it was X-Men world. It was more Fox. It was more inside jokes, right? It could be whatever it wanted. So we're going back to traditional MCU. little hesitant. Also, the fact that this movie was basically completely rewritten and reshot after they made it uh, is a positive because it means they're trying to make it as good as possible, but also a negative because when that happens, often doesn't lead to the best products. But Rogue One is a good example of something that that same thing happened with. And then the only thing that's getting the main thing that's getting me super hyped for Captain America, and I think this was actually something, that I didn't expect to be as like perfect for marketing as it has been, is just purely the Harrison Ford Red Hulk. Like I think everybody's interested in seeing that. I think people are going to go to the movie just to see what Harrison Ford is like as Red Hulk. Outside of that, I don't really have that much anticipation. Don't really care about Captain America that much unless I hear it's great. But for me, it's Superman all day.
It's a tough question to answer, Brandon, because I think if we're basing it off trailers and marketing, I would have to go Brave New World because I've been very impressed by the trailers. They've been very much like the '70s paranoia films and kind of the vibe and moodiness of those. They've been edited superbly, right? And they've done the classic thing with a lot of superhero trailers where you see some of the effects, you're like, "Eh, it doesn't look great, this first one." But all the recent stuff, I'm like, "No, it's everything with like the hand kind of from Eternals, from that looks a lot better, like, the footage just looks better with the Red Hulk in general, like, everything's on that technical level's gotten better, but throughout the time, with all the promos and trailers, they've been doing a great job just showing off, like, "Hey, what are we drawing from? Are we saying what do we mean when it's grounded? Like, what are we trying to, like, show our interests in? Like, what are our inspirations?" Right? And Captain America trilogy with Steve Rogers' Captain America has always kinda done that too, and it's been really fun that way, right? Obviously, Sam Wilson Captain America has been a little less developed because we've only gotten Falcon and Winter Soldier, Avengers aren't there, he doesn't necessarily have the same hook. He has a lot more of like a I wouldn't say controversial. I think it's just a lot more of a difficult hook for some people because he's kind of dealing with stuff that is more modern realities of America and like what is the vision of America? What does it mean to be Captain America? Like saw some people getting all upset about him saying like Captain America isn't really about America. It's more about a man with good virtues and honors and sticking with that. And that's if you've read the comics, that's basically what Steve Rogers, he's like, I don't care about the country. I care about the dream, the ideals of this country. That's the only thing I have loyalty to. And I think when you hear the name Captain America, you assume he must be a nationalist patriot. It's not really like that. And if you've seen the movies, you wouldn't pick up on that either. But, I think it's just the fact that you're replacing Steve Rogers, right? Which people aren't going to love that. They didn't love it in the comics. They're not gonna love it here either, but, I'm excited because Anthony Mackie's a fantastic actor. I think he said all the right things. Harrison Ford is like, "I'm just gonna have a great time here," and I think he's gonna bring out the best of a Red Hulk that maybe Hurt probably wouldn't have done as well, and I'm just excited to see a lot of the connections from Falcon and Winter Soldier finally be fleshed out here, stuff with Eternals, all the other connections here, and the start of the Avengers kinda coming back because that's so essential leading us into Secret Wars, into Doomsday, so, yeah, that's why I'm excited for that, because the marketing has been there in full and we're super close to it. We've only gotten, like, 1 trailer and a couple promos that are very short for Superman. I would say that first kinda look, that first trailer of Superman, I really like it a lot. I think I've been more impressed by the promos more recently and just, like, how they're using, like, the slow-mo of him, like, saving the girl and all that. It looks like they also slightly tweaked the color grading because I know a lot of people were complaining, "Why is it, like, kinda, like, weird neon-ish yellow highlights?" And I feel like they've toned it down just a little bit. So that's a very common thing. Color grade isn't usually final until much later in the process before it's, like, finally handed over to movie theaters too. So if that's something that gets changed, that would actually only make the film a little bit better for me. And I know some people are saying like, "Ah, the Guardians of the Galaxy worked a lot better. His gun style, he's done Scooby-Doo, he's done all these other shows and movies that feel like a little bit more irreverent and funny. How's he gonna land Superman?" I think it's because we just haven't seen, like, a full trailer. We've only seen a teaser, and from
Mhm.
what we've heard from everything like, this film was called Superman Legacy at one point. It was gonna be a lot more and it's the implication of that is it's gonna be a lot more meta, like, dealing with the world of superheroes, him arriving into the world. already established and all that, and if you don't know any of that stuff, you're not prepared for that, right? If you're just the average person being like, "Oh, it's Superman. The universe is starting just like the MCU did." No, not really, right? So I think once we get a better look at that, get a better look at some of the other heroes like Guy Gardner and Hawkgirl and all that, then, I'll be like a little bit more like, "Yeah, I'm ready for Superman." Because I think ultimately I will be. That being said, though, I think Fantastic Four for me, once we just from the little promos that we've gone, I've really liked the aesthetic being so nailed down there in a way that I don't think even Superman has really touched quite yet. So that's probably the top for me. And then I like what I've seen from Thunderbolts. It's just we haven't seen much.
Yeah, I would say I'm way more excited for Fantastic Four than Captain America. That one, those are my top two most anticipated of the year, like easy
Yeah.
top two. This is a year that doesn't have that many high profile movies, and at least from big franchises, in my opinion, outside of those, and like the superhero genre. So we don't have like a Dune this year, or we don't have Robert Eggers' Nosferatu like I was excited for last year. So this year it's more built on some of these second level franchises like Avatar and Mission Impossible and stuff like that. And I'm looking forward to all those. But for me, it's Superman. I'm so excited for Superman, and I would have no matter what, even if I didn't see an image until after I was in the theater ready to watch it, Superman would have been my most anticipated movie of the year, barring a movie from Denis, Robert Eggers, Nolan, or Star Wars. So, yeah, that's how excited I am for that. Brandon also says, second question on a video game. What do you think of Suicide Squad killed the Justice League ending narrated by Harley Quinn that Justice League are actually alive and the ones that died in the game were clones? I never actually played the game. I kind of lost interest when it got delayed like 3 different times, and then I started hearing it was um not going to be in the vein of Arkham, that it was going to be a live service game, and I completely lost interest. And then when the reviews came out and were mediocre at best, I uh I never decided to play it. It was or at least it was, I don't know if it still is. It was the free game of the month for PlayStation. So I did actually add it to my library. Not sure if I'll ever play it. But as for the ending, I did hear that despite not playing it. And I think it's dumb, but it's since they're trying to still say this is the same universe as Arkham, it's it's just them backtracking and
Yeah.
trying to save some face so that they're like, crap, Suicide Squad didn't work out. Now we have to, if we want to make more DC games and we want to do the Justice League, now we've got to make sure they're still alive because people hated the way they ended it. I think especially with Kevin Conroy being his last vocal performance as Batman. Just sad the way they treated that character and treated him. But yeah, I mean, the story. I watched most of the story online or listened to people talk about it. It sounded terrible. A lot of the cutscenes I've seen were terrible, and I think that idea is terrible. Anytime you do, oh, actually, fake death, they were actually clones, it completely just ruins the entire stakes of what you just did. So, I understand why they did it because Suicide Squad's already a failure. They're trying to reclaim it and make more stuff in the future, but they purely did it for money and marketing. If they wanted to stick to the core of what their story was and they actually believed in what their narrative was, they wouldn't have done that.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a game. I mean, I don't really play many DC games or anything, but just following it, it was just so weird. That and Arkham Knights, just that's also like a fairly mediocre follow-up too. Both of them are kinda, like, pushing out Batman in general, right, like, from the story and in a way that's not really satisfying. Yeah, it like Liam said, saving face. I know people around Conroy, and I think Conroy him I don't know if he didn't really interview about it, but I think people around him were saying that he liked kind of letting loose with a different sort of Batman. It just
Mhm.
sucks that that was the last
Yeah.
one, right? Like, if that came out and then we got to see, like, a proper, like I guess you could say crisis on, I think the Crisis 2nd or 3rd film was his last one, and there's that one, like, iconic scene where he's, like, holding up the one of the Jokers or something, and it's pretty good. I just know that people don't really love those animated films either, because it's, like, in the Supergirl Girl of the Future style that either love it or you hate it, It's just very, like, heavy line work too, so at least that seems like a more proper conclusion, but this is, like in more modern times, he's been more famous for the Arkham stuff instead of the animation, so that is a bit disappointing that it's the end, but yeah. But, that's unfortunate, and yeah, I don't know if you typed this up before when I was talking, but yeah, again, I won't call what Mackie said controversy, Brandon. I just think that it's taken a little out of context and without any people actually knowing the lore of Captain America and the fact that we've seen a trilogy of him kinda going up against the government and the people in there. He's there for the ideals. Maybe just as an actor, he might have just worded it a little poorly, but I think he's saying it in the same vein. He's not selected as Captain America by Steve Rogers without that scene of him in Winter Soldier taking care of all these veterans and giving them advice and helping out people. Those are the ideals of what a Captain America should be. Those are the ideals of America. That doesn't necessarily reflect America in its current state or previous states or whatever you wanna put it as. It's the ideal is what you strive for, what's ultimately the reality.
Yeah, I'm interested to see how they tackle that as well as Superman, because Superman's slogan was always truth, justice, and the American way, right? So,
Yeah,
and he's not American.
he's
Um,
really not.
or he is
He's a
technically,
Kansas boy. He's a Kansas boy, yeah,
but yeah, he's an alien. So
yeah.
I'm interested in seeing how they tackle that. And I think it'll be an interesting parallel with the Captain America movie coming out this year as well, because both characters have always been kind of similar. They were created in the same era. Captain America is the one Marvel character that gained notoriety when Marvel started to exist. That was created in the Golden Age. All their characters were created in the Silver Age. So uh, yeah, they're similar in personality because Captain America is basically like, okay, let's make Superman and put him in the war, um, and that's why he was created back in the 40s. So yeah, but yeah, interesting, and thanks for your comments. And then Brandon says Suicide Squad killed the Justice League, wasn't received the best in terms of story and gameplay compared to the original three Arkham games. Rocksteady will probably go back to making Batman Beyond, and I that would be so cool. I would be down for that. I would love
Yeah.
that. The Batman Beyond suit is one of my favorite suits to wear in the Arkham games as well when you're doing like the challenges post game. So really would be awesome. I just hope Rocksteady, they're not going to get a full redemption. Um, oh God, what's the studio that made The Witcher and Cyberpunk?
Oh,
CD Project Red. They're not going to get a full CD Project Red redemption tour because Cyberpunk was like actually a good game with just the complete mess on launch, but the core of it was good. And then they finally fixed it. So they're not going to get a full redemption like that because Suicide Squad is inherently a flawed game and it just got more flawed. But hopefully they can get back to their roots like CD Projekt did, and now they've got the next Witcher coming out. I hope that Rocksteady, because I really loved them. Arkham games were some of my favorite video games growing up. Like I've played them so many times. Batman Arkham City, I used to always say was one of like, if not my favorite game, like top three for me. I don't know where it would be nowadays. But yeah, that was such a great game. And Arkham Knight was awesome too. I was kind of tired of the Jason Todd story over and over and over again at that point. So wasn't as on board with the narrative, but the gameplay was excellent. Loved all the different features. So cool. So hopefully they go back to it and they get some redemption. And then Brandon also says only parts that I liked of Suicide Squad was Jason Isaacs' performance as Brainiac and the Batman Museum. Well, cool. I'll have to check it out one day. My plan with a lot of those games that I was like looking forward to, but got terrible reviews. Video games are, it's unlike movies where like I have a Regal pass and I can just go see a bad movie because it's free for me, or I pay $20 a month and I can just go watch a bad movie for 2 hours and come back. I don't buy bad video games. Even if I was super hyped for something, if the reviews are terrible, I'm not going to spend $60 on it because that, and also, 10, 12, 15, 20 hours. So, um, but yeah, I'll maybe check it out one day once the hype is completely gone. But I feel like if it's live service and they're shutting it down soon, then might never get that chance. But that's going to wrap up our stream tonight, everybody. Thanks so much for the comments. I know there's plenty we didn't get to. I hope you guys enjoyed the show. We tried to make it a little more accessible for everybody. I know we had some that were hot button topics and we went a long time on them, like the Old Republic stuff, but hopefully you guys enjoyed those conversations. Again, come back next week. We'll be back next Tuesday talking about Star Wars again, any news that comes up, but mostly fueled by your guys' questions. So keep sending them in. Look into Patreon if you're interested in joining at that tier that gets you priority chat access. There's a lot of other perks there as well. Stay tuned for more videos coming out throughout the week, as well as shorts, community polls, all the good stuff you get on Star Wars Lads. It's all still coming out. So keep an eye out for all of that type of stuff. Thank you so much for watching the stream tonight, everybody. And we will see you all next week for another one. Good night, everybody.